Oh, wow.
But if you forget.
I do, yes.
I've got 7 copies.
Oh, usually.
All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Bruce, do you wanna make a motion for?
Yes, I'll make the motion that we appoint Brian as the alternate to serve on the board tonight in absence of a member. Second. Bring one, just bring one.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Just so you know, Ned's gonna be late, but he will be here in about 15 minutes.
Sure.
All right, so this evening, we're starting out by talking about the housing survey and the housing audits that Jen Bradley from
Oh, okay.
RCC put together for us. There's a lot of information here, and just for folks who are here listening, this is not final, so this is the first time we're really sitting down and talking with Jen about what's in here, so. Thank you. Any questions before we get started? Anybody on the board? All right, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, so thank you for having me. I haven't been here in a while. Because of sort of the time frame that we've done a lot of the housing work, I just kind of tonight want to talk to you about where we are, sort of next steps. No decisions need to be made. This is really, as Karen said, you're seeing some of this for the first time, so I'm really laying context for then you to be able to go back and review when you have a little bit more time. And I will say I'm already scheduled to come back here on June 6th so that we have our next discussion scheduled for folks in the room and at home. So back in February through March 22nd, we issued a housing survey. It was an online survey. We did get one paper copy. Paper copies were available. Town hall. There were flyers posted around. We posted on social media. It was on the town website. And at town meeting, there was a big poster and flyers handed out, which I know a number of you helped sort of staff and hand out flyers. So we got pretty good bump from that event specifically. So we had 212 participants. The vast majority own a home in Brentwood. We had a few folks that own property in Brentwood but don't necessarily live in Brentwood. That was a fairly small percentage. And also a few people that also owned businesses in Brentwood, although everyone that took the survey that owned a business in Brentwood also resides in Brentwood. So a couple of we got lots and lots of comments. People had a lot to say about housing. It is a divisive topic sometimes. There were people on the spectrum of no more housing anywhere at any time. There were perspectives in the middle, and then there were people that said we need a lot more housing. So that's kind of the arc of what a lot of the opinions are. Everybody has a copy of all of the comments that were submitted. The intent is to have this be, it is available online right now, but also have it be posted on the town website so that it in perpetuity can be served as a reference, but this is a snapshot in time of what people had to say about housing. I will say because of the timing, I think, of this survey going out, we did get a lot of heavy comments skewing towards the impact of budget and taxes, which is not uncommon, but it happened to be during town meeting and voting and budget time, so I do think it skews a little bit heavy towards that specific concern as it comes to housing. So some of the big takeaways from the housing survey, and I'm not going to go through every question and every result. I think you guys need some time to peruse. Again, this will all be available for everyone to read through all the comments. So I have completed a housing summary. So you should have a copy of it. Looks like this. It's about 4 pages. It's meant to be the cliff notes of what was said in the survey. Gives a little background as to the grant that was used to help pay for this work. I should know it's a $40,000 grant that Brentwood received, so no direct Brentwood taxpayer dollars are going towards this other than the in-kind participation of the planning board and some of the town staff. Some of the major survey findings. About half of the respondents have lived in Brentwood for at least a decade. That's telling because people that generally have resided in a community are more familiar with it, and they tend to be pretty happy with it if they've lived in a community for that long. So that is a telling statistic. You're a little bit of a younger community as far as how long people have lived in town than most of the other communities I've done these surveys in, and this is my 10th community to do a housing survey in the past 2 years, so it was a little interesting of a statistic to note. You are skewing a little younger for participants. About a little under half were over the age of 55, although your average age in Brentwood is around 50. So that kind of gives you an idea of who was taking the survey. It tended to skew a little older in your demographic. More than half of folks that took it work full time. About a quarter are retired. About a fifth of the people that took the survey had an income higher than $200,000. The reason for that $200,000 mark being telling is that the median household income for this area is a little over $100,000. So if you have a dual household income, you are twice above the median household income. If you're hitting that $200,000 and people are earning $100,000. Only about 17% indicated they had a household income of under $100,000, so that gives you another skew as to who was taking the survey. Was it folks that earn more in Brentwood or earn less? About a third of folks did not give their annual income. It was an optional question to give. Some of the major findings, and I will say some of these findings are my interpretation of 66 pages of comments. So if you read through these and you think I didn't capture one or something needs to be called out or said differently, that is why I'm here giving you context for reviewing those pages. It is good bedtime reading. It'll help you fall right asleep, or it'll get your blood pressure up. Depends on what you're kind of going for. So the thing that came across very strongly, and this is a fairly common thing because people that took the survey live in Brentwood. You like Brentwood. Brentwood is a nice community to live in. There are reasons people want to either move to Brentwood or want to continue to live here. You like the characteristics. That strongly came through in rural character largely. Open spaces, natural resources, historic components, some of the agricultural, but still quick access to amenities in neighboring communities and commutability to a lot of different employment centers. One of the questions that was asked during the survey, and I'll increase this so folks in the back can see it, was if you had to have more housing, where might you be okay with seeing more housing? Where would you think it should go? Where do you think it should definitely not go? And, where is it a little bit more okay? So when people took this survey, or took this question, the place that got the most hits for where more housing might be acceptable was along 125 and North Road, or near the county complex. Likely because that's just either infrastructure-wise more feasible, or you are already seeing it. Places people definitely did not want more housing are where you already have less density. That was the strongest correlation geographically. Now, there's a few places in between all of that, but that was the general sentiment that came away from that question. That becomes an important piece of information when you might be considering, well, if we were to consider zoning changes. That's a good place to start as far as having further discussion. So nothing I'm putting out there is things you have to do there for your consideration, and more information as you go to make choices. So one piece of information. The next big takeaway, natural resources and protecting those are a really big priority. Lots of comments about the fact that Brentwood does not have public sewer, does not have public water. You're reliant on private wells. You have a lot of really good intact wetlands, the rivers, the aquifers, the open space came out really, really strongly. So as you start talking about infrastructure and the ability to support housing, that became a really big concern of not losing the characteristics, but also not spoiling the things that you rely on. As I mentioned, tax implications came out really, really strongly. They're almost always brought up in these types of surveys, but they were very dominant in yours. Again, I think because of the time of year. Now, it didn't mean that people said no housing. It just there was concern about the taxes. So any housing decision you may make that's related to land use regulations, having an understanding of what those tax implications may or may not mean, I think would be very important for Brentwood. But also informing folks as to what the real data behind it. There were definitely some misunderstandings in some of the comments that are found in there, or misconceptions. Doesn't mean people are wrong. It just means they might not have a full understanding as to how the tax implications and some of the housing stock and what demographics they may be aiming for, how that whole process actually works. So I think further information about just how taxes work would be very important for any of those conversations. I have thrown in a couple of quotes into this template. There are lots of quotes. I tried to pull in ones that sort of said a lot in a little package. If you see ones that you think are more representative, I'm happy to pull in more quotes because I think it's good for the town to have its own voice be in its documents, not just my interpretation of its voice. The last thing is that most residents feel really secure in their housing. One of the questions was, will your current housing meet your needs in the next 5, 10 to 20 years? Most people said, yeah. We like where we live. You know, we might need to make it a little different because we're aging or because our children are moving out. We might modify things. But for the vast majority, yes, we're comfortable was the answer. And I've found that to be pretty universally true in the surveys where I've done this, no matter what the community is.
Can I,
Oh, yep.
should I wait?
It's okay with me.
About that question, do you think, and you've done a couple of these, it sounds like, do you think they were answering that in terms of whether or not their house, like the physical property, would maintain them, as opposed to like, in 20 years, my tax rate or my tax burden is going to be this, and will I still be able to afford it?
I think that came through in a variety of some of the questions. Like, that may have been, so one of the other questions was, what are your concerns about housing in the
Okay.
future? The tax component did come through with some people's answers. But will your house serve your needs? Like, is it
Like your physical
your
building.
physical needs or your family needs? The overwhelming majority was yes.
Okay. Thank you.
So this last one, this is kind of the hardest one, and the one the planning board has to wrestle with the most, is people don't understand what the housing goals are for Brentwood. Whether that's in context of what the planning board can do, what the town can do, and then what the town's obligations under state law are, people don't understand all of that in a package and how that impacts them, their taxes, how the community develops. Basically, this is not the first conversation, this is not the second conversation, this is just one of a continuum of conversations I think you're going to need to have. But I did pull this quote out because I thought it was most representative of why do we keep needing goals? Why do you need housing goals? Well, your master plan is the basis for your regulations that also help you to establish where the community will go in the next 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So I think understanding what the planning board's role in all of this also needs to continually be communicated.
It seemed like there are a lot of comments that said, just stop growth, stop, no more housing, which,
Yep.
do you see that in other surveys, knowing that that's not under our control?
There is always a component of people that take surveys like this that say, I don't want anything to change. I want nothing to change.
But
That-
that's not the reality.
That's not legally feasible, and it's not the reality. I find that when that's the sentiment you're getting back, you need better explaining, like, okay, well, when you say you don't want change, what changes, like, what components of the change are you finding negative? Is it the taxes? Is it the visual because you're taking away the characteristic? Is it the loss of the open? What is it that you don't want to change? You gotta dig deeper, and that's really hard. I do not have a magic bullet for you on any of this, so I will give you what knowledge I have, but you guys have to make the decisions, and the residents have to make the decisions ultimately.
Jen?
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
It's okay.
Thank you so much. So I know you said you like there's no silver bullet, but are there best practices that you've seen other communities employed in terms of raising that understanding?
Raising the understanding as far as that you can't just stop all development.
Right.
Yes and no. The thing I have seen planning boards and to some degree conservation commissions and select boards do is simply reviewing your documents, your master plan on a regular basis and keeping it updated. It's not top of mind for most people. It's not top of mind, I'm sure, for you guys as planning board members, but if you keep having the dialogue, it at least makes it so that if someone comes and questions it, they can understand it. You know, but ultimately, if someone wants to put something on their property and it follows the rules, it's very hard to stop that. One of the specific questions, I did want to give you the full breadth of what people had answered in this summary, was whether people indicated agreement or not with a couple of statements related to housing and affordable housing, because part of this project is certainly talking about affordable housing and workforce housing. It's not the sole part of this project, but it is an important part because that is the state law that ultimately Brentwood does have to come into compliance with, and you're not unusual that, you know, you're not quite in compliance with the law. Well, do you think that Brentwood provides affordable housing choices? There was pretty strong disagreement that Brentwood provides affordable housing choices. Now, part of this did not get into the full explanation as to what affordable means, but that's an important, people's perception of what is affordable is a really strong component of this discussion. Do people have adequate rental options in Brentwood? Most said no. Now, a lot of people in the survey said they did not want there to be more rental options in Brentwood. That came through pretty strongly as well. Not everyone, but there was a large number that did say that. Does Brentwood provide housing choices for all ages? That was a little bit more across the spectrum. More people sort of in that neutral agree, disagree. There weren't as many strong feelings. Does Brentwood provide adequate housing options for seniors? That spread the gamut. And I think that is largely in reaction to the number of 55 plus developments and very recent 55 plus developments you guys have had proposed and approved. And I know those have been hot topics. One of the questions we did ask was how people felt about some of the recent housing development in Brentwood, which have largely been 55 plus. They generally did not like them, which I think is why some of your regulations have changed in the past couple of years and have been taken off the books. The last one was, does Brentwood provide adequate housing choices to get near jobs and to be able to get near transit routes? People actually generally thought that across the board that you did. You know, kind of, some said no, some said yes, but you are near major transportation routes with 125 and 101. You can get to a lot of employment centers fairly easily. Maybe not Boston, but you can get to a lot of places fairly easily.
Just real quick,
Yep.
this $407,000, how does that relate to the workforce housing?
You know what? I think I spliced that incorrectly, but I will say the 407,000, just as a point of reference, 407,000 is the maximum affordable purchase price for the median household income for Brentwood, or the area that Brentwood is in.
So it ties into the definition of affordable, basically.
Yes.
But versus workforce,
So 107 is the maximum a home could sell for that is identified as workforce housing if it has a legal restriction for the price it can sell for. 407 is the maximum purchase price.
Jen?
Just, you had mentioned something about some law that Brentwood isn't fully in compliance. What law are you referring to and how do you know we're out of compliance?
So I know you're out of compliance because effectively every community in southern New Hampshire is out of compliance.
With what? I'm sorry.
The state workforce housing law.
We repealed it, so we're definitely out of compliance.
Well,
No, no.
it's, yeah,
So,
so we had a workforce housing ordinance, but the law doesn't require a workforce housing ordinance.
Correct.
It requires like reasonable opportunities, so somebody could come to this, community and have-
inventory.
Yeah.
or land that could be developed, given our rules, and into workforce housing. So I think it's a gray, I know you're saying everybody's out of compliance, but I think it is not like really hard and fast.
there is not a hard and fast rule. It's hard to prove you're in compliance with just existing housing stock because the housing values are so high in southern New Hampshire. So what the workforce housing law says is that every municipality in the state of New Hampshire has to provide reasonable and realistic, and this is a key word, opportunity for the development of workforce housing. Now, workforce housing is considered affordable housing. Opportunity can be in a lot of different forms. It can be you have an inclusionary housing ordinance or a workforce housing ordinance, which Brentwood did have for a few years. If you have that, you're automatically in compliance. The other way to be in compliance is that you are meeting your regional proportionate fair share of workforce housing. Basically, for the seacoast, there's a portion of Brentwood's housing that meets affordability standards, whether that is restricted by law or just it naturally is lower in cost. There is not a town in southern New Hampshire that meets that fair share proportionate because so much of our housing stock is simply above affordability thresholds. So when I say Brentwood's not in compliance, I don't mean to say that Brentwood is negligent. It's almost impossible to be in compliance at this point.
And we could have been in compliance in the past and then prices rose so high.
Yes.
Yes, and some towns have simply gotten out of compliance because of that very factor. Now that opportunity, that term opportunity that I mentioned, just because you allow for the development of workforce housing doesn't mean someone's going to build it, doesn't mean you can force someone to build it, and it doesn't mean it's necessarily going to happen. You're providing the opportunity.
I mean, technically, every house could have an ADU that would, you know,
Yep, accessory
be more
dwellings
affordable.
can be counted towards affordability. There have been numbers coming out where new additions onto houses or detached accessory dwellings are running $300,000. Well, that does qualify as affordable under some circumstances, but that's a pretty big investment for a lot of homeowners.
Yeah.
It's not, accessory dwellings are not the thing that are going to save.
For 900 square feet.
Right.
Yeah.
You're saying it's gonna cost $300,000 for someone to build that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
so it's
you-
not just like putting,
Tell the legislature.
I have no say over the state laws, unfortunately, anymore.
So it really boils down in court to the low-hanging fruit. So if Brentwood just put their affordable ordinance back into our ordinances, allowances, that in itself may deflect a few potential plaintiffs. But when they get to the side of the equation where you're making it affordable, you're specifically allowing affordable criteria, that really isn't enough, because we're not really, just by putting it in, giving people that opportunity, or likely opportunity to.
As long, if you have an inclusionary housing ordinance and you allow it to occur in at least half of the town,
Which we always did. Yeah, we just had an overlay district.
yeah,
so
and that can do it. Then you are technically in compliance with the law. And it means that a developer, a builder, can't then take you to court for not being in compliance with the law.
So they'll probably first go to a town that doesn't have that, but
Yeah, let's get, I know, there's some of this in the audit, and I wanted to talk about multifamily too, and I know that, like, there's some relationship there, presumably.
Yep, I'll go through the audit in just a second, but I
Okay.
did want to get a little bit of feedback from you guys of, I know some of you had seen some of these comments, you hadn't seen all of them. Did these generally seem like the topics that you've heard when you've had these
We do
conversations?
not like to hear them,
Right.
you're spot on.
Okay.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the difficult ones are the, you know, we don't need goals and don't do anything, because it's just not, I mean, if we don't have goals, things,
But you're always gonna
things,
get that
things
response.
just happen, yeah, so I
You're
should just let it go.
But that was like the majority of the responses.
Well, I guess my question would be to those people, because it sounds like they're mostly people that have lived here for longer. Where were they when all of the stuff was being built 20 and 30 years ago?
Moving in.
Okay. Right? If you've lived here for a really long time, then this is not a new thing that's just happened overnight.
Change is hard, I guess is my,
But
I
you
think-
know, we asked for honest responses
Yeah.
and we got them.
I think you very much did.
I mean, your other part of your equation is that there needs to be some education around what's some
Yeah.
of these things.
Yeah,
And Brentwood has a history, a distinct history of turning back on ordinances that have been progressive in trying to attempt actions that would include affordable housing. We had soil type lot sizing, which decreased the lot size, allowed people to develop on smaller lots, and that got run out of town. We had an affordable housing ordinance that provided 2 developments, and when those 2 developments sort of happened in the same area of town, that got run out of town. So it's a constant educational issue. But even when you point out to people that an affordable unit is almost $500,000, if there already I sound pessimistic, I don't mean to be, but it's frustrating to have a conversation with someone who doesn't realize we're not talking about Section 8 housing. We're
Yeah.
talking about a different form of housing, but it's not Section 8.
there were comments in here like renters bring crime and stuff that's, again, you're talking about a $400,000 house.
It's
Almost $500,000 house.
And it's interesting that they want lower, many people want lower taxes, I mean, everybody does. But to equate that to higher taxes in senior housing doesn't make any sense, because that's not the cost driver. Senior developments are not the cost driver in terms of town
Yep.
expenditures.
So just to sort of talk,
Oh,
sorry.
I actually had a question that I was gonna say before this, but the point that where were we 25 years ago? I wasn't born, but I was here when I was 12, when you guys chose to waive a whole series of planning board and zoning rules
I mean, I was.
about the Wilson Way development on our road. And I think the discussion you guys are having about, I'm sorry that you think talking to the citizens of the town's an inconvenience about educating us on $500,000 homes. I think that's kind of absurd. But the idea that the people of this town believe you guys are changing, we're not under the impression that you guys are doing it. We're just asking you not to. I think that's the general vibe there. Forcing this in the way you have done with the senior developments, forcing it in the way you do with the zoning changes, not exactly what the general population of the town was. My actual question about the survey was about the map that you pulled up.
Mhm.
I was wondering how people chose where they thought development was. Like what was the question? How did you prompt it?
The question was if you were to allow more housing, if you were to have more housing or denser housing, or not allow housing in certain parts of town. This isn't exactly, but it's very. Where would you want it to be? And people could put pins, as many pins as they wanted, wherever they wanted. It was really a very basic mapping exercise with that intention. And it's very common for people to put where they're okay with, I'll say, more housing or denser housing where it already exists, because they're used to seeing that. It can be the start of a conversation. It is certainly not the sole thing. The planning board should say, okay, people are okay with this, we'll just do more dense housing. That's not what the intention is. It's the start of a conversation.
Yeah, and I want to make sure that we give you time to get through the whole thing. The only thing I want to say in response to that is that we can't change ordinances without a town vote. Like all the things that you mentioned and the ordinances that have come and gone all go to the public and are decided by the majority of the community, so. But and we're not deciding anything tonight. You want to go to the audit now?
One step in between, but,
Okay.
so, based on the
Sorry, sorry, can I just say one thing? I just think it's important, just for the record, that I think that the remark about what Glenn said was a mischaracterization of what Glenn said. So I just think that, for the
Glenn said he
record,
was frustrated, not that it was
It doesn't.
annoying.
Okay.
He's been here
But
long.
I.
all right.
Sorry.
That's okay. So a good chunk of this project is doing the master plan chapter that is basically your policy for any housing changes you might make in the future. We've done quite a bit of background. You guys have had a couple of presentations between me and Victoria. We've had the video that got recorded that got posted to the website. We've done the survey. So we've got the data. We've got some outreach. The one thing that I do need you guys to take a look at, and I will be sending it electronically to Jillian so you can have more time to peruse it, are some housing goals and a couple of suggested actions. This is going to be related to the audit I'm going to get to in a second, but it would be great to get some feedback on these goals. I tried to craft them to the degree I could from the survey and some of the other data, but they're basically review existing regulations, identify opportunities where you could do more housing that maintain the rural character. I did add in the term fiscal responsibility because of that tax feedback that we got. Increase housing in general while retaining rural character, because there is a need not only in Brentwood but the Seacoast and New Hampshire and the state for more housing, but it doesn't have to be big housing. It can be small housing in small areas. And the last one is to ensure compliance with the state workforce housing law that we kind of just discussed. So I will send these out. I need you guys to give me some feedback because I can give you words, but the goals and the actions are ultimately yours. And the audit itself will actually give you some more framework for if you want to add more actions that you can put in. This is me framing what the land use audit is. I went through it with a chair a couple, 2 or 3 months ago, with Victoria, and I've gone through it with Glenn and Jillian to get their feedback. What the land use regulation audit is intended to do is to capture a variety of tools that can be used that are housing related, that are land use regulations, that can be used either you have on the books and they maybe could use some tweaking, you don't have on the books and you might want to consider adopting. Many of them interplay with each other. This is intended to be able to be used for outreach should you go forward with them, so you have sort of some basic language in hand. Also to give you the pros and cons for Brentwood as to is there community support for this tool? You know, is it an issue because you have no infrastructure or you do have the infrastructure? What do your master plan, surveys, past votes, what have those said about using this tool? How likely is it to bring you more housing or not a lot of housing? And how just feasible is it, either because of cost or the process of getting it adopted? Is it just a site plan regulation tweak? That's usually not as big of a lift. Is it a huge zoning overhaul? That's a much bigger lift. Or is it something that has to go through the select board because it's an economic development tool? So that's kind of the framework we did all of these tools in. So some of the things that we do is actually include what kind of housing do you allow in the different zones in town? Do you allow single family, multifamily, manufactured housing? What's allowed, what's not? Then we do an impact summary. How likely is doing the different land use regulation tool to result in a lot of housing, a little bit of housing? Is it likely to change community character? So rural character is really important. Is this just adding a couple housing units, so maybe it's not going to drastically impact the rural character, or is it adding a 300 unit apartment complex on 125? Is there support for it based on feedback from the survey, from previous votes, from public hearings, from other conversations? What has the public or the residents said currently and maybe historically about using this tool? And is it feasible? Is it going to cost a lot? Is it going to take a lot of time to implement?
These are hypotheticals. I just want to make that really clear because you said
Yes.
300 units.
Yeah, I'm just trying to use
She works with
extreme.
communities all across the region. This is all,
I do have tools in here that you may find, you might just see me list it and you're like, why would we in Brentwood ever consider this? I'm putting in all of the tools because I want to give you guys backing that you have considered using the tools. Even if you just gut reaction think we will never use this. Part of my job in all of this work is to give you backing so that when you go to make decisions, if you are challenged with those, with a development or in court or whatever, you have some backing that you considered it and had thoughtful discussion of it. You might say some of these, we're never going to have another workforce housing ordinance. It doesn't work for us. That's fine. I have no say over that. But let's document it. Let's document the why.
A couple of quick questions. Could we, for this table, for feasibility, kind of break that out? Because I noticed there were some things that you said that there's, we don't have water and sewer. That would be kind of technical feasibility, but then there are some things that are, we can't do it ourselves. We would have to hire.
So that is broken down as we get deeper into the document. If I had to summarize this entire document in one shot, this is the shot. So this is the matrix that looks at what is the different housing strategy, accessory dwellings, age-friendly neighborhoods, cluster housing, infill development. Okay, those are all the strategies. How much housing might you get from those? I'm going to use accessory dwellings just as a very easy example. So with accessory dwellings, if you made a variety of potential tweaks to accessory dwelling, how much housing might you get? You might get some. Accessory dwellings are not going to solve the housing crisis, but you may increase opportunity for certain people on certain lots, and that's increasing housing diversity. Is it likely to change community character? It's probably for accessory dwellings generally going to be fairly neutral because it's not adding a lot. Is there community support? Based on the existing feedback I have, kind of depends on, are you talking about detached accessory dwellings? Are you talking about more than one accessory dwelling? What are you talking about? The specifics on this one really matter as to whether people support it or they don't.
Excuse me, I don't want to.
Yep.
That is state law now, right? Every town must.
Every town must allow where you allow single-family homes, at least one attached accessory dwelling.
And that's Brentwood's code. So
Yep.
that's the
You
least
are-
objectionable, generally speaking. The only problem is, as we talked previously, you really can't construct a unit like that for less than $300,000.
True.
And I think there is legislation pending that would add a second, that would add
Second
one.
one, yeah.
And I think detached too would be, it's enabling legislation.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yep. So there are some things related to accessory dwellings. Maybe you only want to have one attached accessory dwelling. Maybe that's just,
Well, the second one hasn't passed, that's just.
No, that's still pending.
No, it has not, no.
just give me 1 second. There are things you can tweak that are administrative in nature. Well, maybe you want to allow that accessory dwelling with certain criteria, might be exactly the criteria you currently have, by right. You don't need to get any additional approvals other than a building permit. So there are tweaks like that, which is why the feasibility is considered fairly high because it's generally small zoning tweaks or administrative tweaks. So, sorry, Stephanie.
I just wanted to get clarification for the community character column. Does more tree symbols mean more negative impacts to community character?
It generally means it's a neutral impact. It's not going to mean really significant changes.
Okay, but more trees means more changes?
Yes,
Okay.
and more change is not necessarily
Not necessarily
bad,
just
but it more
compared to
more
other-
impactful to the
But
character.
there's a range of the number of trees
1 to 3 is the range we're using on all
Okay.
of them. And if I could give you a numeric breakdown, I would. A little bit of this is subjective. So if you disagree with any of the number of trees or smiley faces, please tell me. But we were trying to get a lot of information into a very small package, just honestly for that communication piece.
I think what would be helpful is if the trees and houses were in relation to each other. So one of these has to start with a 1. You know, like what's the lowest impact? And then kind of go from there. Like if you had to rank them and then figure out.
So I can't rank these for you, to be honest.
Yeah.
These you'd have to talk through. This is meant to help give you some prioritization, and a number of these, as I mentioned, play off of each other.
Yeah.
So you might not do accessory dwellings in a silo. You might consider it with a different zoning change potentially. I wish I could do that.
Yeah, it's
And
just hard to tell how you would prioritize these, I guess. But we'll keep talking.
Okay. So the strategies that we use for this are accessory dwellings, adaptive reuse, which is basically taking old buildings and using them for new purposes, in this case potentially housing or mixed use. Having age-friendly neighborhoods, those can be 55-plus neighborhoods, but they can also be neighborhoods that are designed for mixed age range that may have some age-restricted units as part of them. Cluster housing is cluster subdivisions, conservation subdivisions, open space subdivisions. Same concept, different names, where you basically have the houses all be closer together to retain the open space, so you're protecting the natural resources and having smaller infrastructure with roadways, and sometimes shared septic systems and wells.
And that's what we had with senior housing. That was a
Yep.
benefit of our senior housing ordinance before that was kicked out also by the town. So a lot is education.
Often it does come down to that, but there may have been things with the 55-plus cluster subdivision that, you know, if you had tweaked them slightly, maybe they would have not been kicked out. And I don't have the answer to that, but. Form-based code, this is a zoning type where you basically are using architectural design to identify whether you want to have things that are already existing to be the type of development you're getting. So buildings closer to roadways, sidewalks sometimes, it can be the architectural design. Form-based code is probably not, for an extensive thing in Brentwood, likely to happen. It could be something you had in certain zones, or if you had some designated overlays like on 125 or on North Road for certain kinds of development or slightly denser development in key places. Infill development is exactly what it sounds like. You're taking where you have existing development and allowing a little bit more density. Inclusionary zoning, that's that inclusionary housing or workforce housing zone where you give a little bit more density to a development or a subdivision by allowing someone to have a little more density, but some of the units have to be workforce qualifying and have legal restrictions, whether they're owned or rented. Mixed-use development is having that housing with the commercial development to enable sort of that cost. This is typically only going to be done in certain areas of town. Planned unit developments, this is sort of a extreme version of a mixed-use development. It's meant to have a lot of different buildings going up with a lot of different uses and making sure that they are compatible. A very general thing is considering reducing zoning and subdivision requirements. This can be everything from parking lot or parking space requirements to frontage to setbacks to acreage size. So there can be a lot that comes underneath this, and you can do small bits, which is why I say some of these play into other strategies. Two of the tax-related tools that can be used are TIF districts, tax incentive financing districts. These are not ones that are usually taken under lightly. I know Brentwood has had conversations about implementing TIF districts. This is not done at the planning board level quite as much, but you guys have a role to play, and certainly if it's something you want to explore, having it be in a housing chapter, at least acknowledging, is important. It is already in the economic development work that was done, I think at this point, about 2 years ago as far as discussions. The other option is a transfer of development rights. What this basically is that you allow more development in one part of town by having someone conserve or provide money for protecting open space in another part of town that's generally more environmentally sensitive or special. So it's kind of a credit trade for density of development. So we do include, because it always comes up, housing terms, because this is the thing that confuses everybody, and I talk about this all the time, and it confuses me. What do we mean by accessory dwellings? What do we mean by low-income housing? What do we mean by market rate, mixed income, multifamily, single-family, workforce housing? What does the workforce housing statute say? So, again, this is meant to be helpful for education should you guys go forward with any of this, to have it all in one space to be able to use it.
Jen,
Yep.
would we be better served by previous ordinances we've had and revisiting them and applying them to these situations and tweaking them, like you said, or?
I think that you guys are a little unusual in that you've had some of these and they're no longer on the books. There's only a couple other communities that
Have
is
done
the
that.
case. I think it gives you a leg up because you already have a draft, if nothing else,
Okay.
and you have some insight of why maybe it didn't work or why it was repealed, which is really good insight to have. I think if you were to undertake ones that you've already had, looking at what you had on the books is a really great place to start, but it doesn't mean that should be verbatim what you try to put forth again. So a little bit how the document is framed, that we do have little icons and say how you can get into the different housing strategies. It is, again, meant to be like you can deep dive into the document. We talk about accessory dwellings, all the things I just covered, what they are, and then what page you can find out more information. So I'm just going to dive down into the accessory dwelling as an overview because of time. So these are meant to be standalone fact sheets almost if you needed to use them for education or the basis for that conversation. So what is an accessory dwelling? We talk about the state law that requires that you allow accessory dwellings, and this may need to be tweaked with updates out of Concord. Do you currently allow those accessory dwellings in Brentwood or not? What are some of the benefits for accessory dwellings? And we do talk about different types of accessory dwellings. Are they attached, or is it more than one? What is the reason for having them? Why are they good for housing? And then we talk about potential constraints. Why might you not be able to utilize this strategy, accessory dwellings? Some lots simply can't accommodate them. You have some small lots in Brentwood that maybe their septic system can't accommodate that accessory dwelling without having a brand new system put in. Or maybe it's just in such a wet area they can't have it. They have restrictions because they have a homeowners association in a subdivision that doesn't allow for it. We talked about price of construction and permitting. That $300,000 for an ADU, well, that makes it probably not as feasible. There was some work done out of Portsmouth where that $300,000 price tag kind of comes out. They looked to see what the administrative cost of permitting those ADUs were, and it was about $30,000 so about 10% of that cost. Now, some of that was a state permit if they needed a septic permit, or if they had to hook up to the sewer, or they needed a different meter. Some of it was, did they have to go through the Portsmouth Building Department and Planning Department approvals? Did they have to do fire hose? So some of those you can relieve by allowing some administrative tweaks. Some of them you can't. So there is that cost and barrier that gets played into. If you don't allow a certain strategy, in this case ADUs, what's the opportunity cost? Well, you may get less housing development because someone really needs that in-law suite for whatever reason. They need that rental income to be able to afford their taxes in Brentwood. It allows for more diversity. You also have the potential for more sprawl because people want to move to Brentwood. Brentwood's a nice town. You have a good school system. You have nice trails. You have lots of amenities. Well, you may cause there to be more sprawl because people are trying to move in here and then eating up the open space that you really enjoy. So getting down into the considerations for implementation. This is the hard part. If you might consider this, what do you need to be aware of? What should you be thinking about? Are there ways to reduce that administrative cost by having pre-designed accessory dwellings? In the survey that we asked a lot of questions about, do you like this house picture or that house picture? I'm gonna be honest, we kind of got a wash of results. Some people did not want anything, and so they said they didn't like anything, and some people said, yeah, maybe. So if you had pre-designed ADUs, and that is a real thing to have a catalog of them, maybe that makes the permitted process easier. Are there ways of keeping track of older accessory dwellings, those that may not fully be legal or not, and getting them into compliance so they can be legal? And then you can count them as housing units to help comply with the state law. So there's some of that, counting old existing apartments as housing. You want them to be safe, obviously. Doesn't change community character at all, because they're already there. Also being more explicit about if you do want to allow detached ADUs, what they can look like. Do you only want them to exist in existing structures? We've tried to put a lot into this in as few words as we can that are still accessible to the average resident to understand. We tried not to use a lot of jargon. There is still jargon, I can't promise there's not, but that's the basic structure of all of the strategies. I'm not gonna go through all of them because of time, but we did try to capture where we could, where there were also examples of what adaptive, or what the strategy may be, what the strategy may be. So, and we've got a few examples of New Market for adaptive reuse, and a few others as you dive through the document.
So, thank you. So I marked up, you guys should all go through this page by page, and then, I don't know the best way to get feedback to you. I'll say a couple of things now, if that's all right. One is that I think there are places where there's this kind of assumed connection between a strategy and affordability that I'm not always convinced is there, that, there isn't the evidence there. Like even density, when you go to downtown Exeter, it's not affordable just because they have higher density. And I would say that with the age restricted too, I think that they're not, they have houses that 2,200, 2,400 square feet, so it's not necessarily downsizing, and they're minimum 600, I think. So there's places in here where it says, if you do this, you'll get that, and that's what I think we really need to get to, is what can we actually do to get somewhere?
So I do want to make a general statement that the affordable housing was part of this whole project from the very beginning. Housing diversity is really what we can tackle, though. And affordability falls under that. But that's why you're not seeing a lot of, if you do this, you'll get a lot of affordable housing.
Yeah.
There is with a few of them because that's their explicit target. You can enable all of the accessory dwellings and adaptive reuse that you want. I can't promise you, unless there is a legal covenant, that it will be affordable and remain affordable.
Yeah.
Brentwood is not going to solve this by itself. The planning board is not going to solve this by itself. You have a very small piece of some things that you can do to enable housing diversity, and with some of that does come affordability.
I want to ask one other question while Glenn's here, and that's, there's a few places where it says that if we change something, it'd be better because our process is slow and complicated or something. Like relative to other towns and our ordinances, do you think that when somebody comes in for a subdivision that we're slow and complicated?
I think it really depends entirely on the complexity of the proposal.
So it's a give and take.
It really is. I think that we have done, well, the two examples, let's go right to it. The 13 lot, single family subdivision with a road located right next to the 71 unit, single family housing,
Senior housing.
One project took 18 months for review.
Yeah.
One took 2 months. And there was much more complexity with the condominium development than with the single-family large lot development. That's the point I'm making.
Yeah,
That regardless of there were a lot of other factors that
Yeah.
played into them, but just looking at it from that perspective, complexity of a development makes the review process longer.
So next steps and timeline.
So I am scheduled to come back here on June 6th. I will be sending all of these documents to Jillian to be able to distribute. But I do think that it would be helpful if I could have 2 or 3 of you meet with me in like 2 weeks, 3 weeks before the June meeting to sort of talk through some big things and any major tweaks that we may need to make before coming back to the full board, if that would be.
Yeah.
And I think it would probably be like an hour-long discussion.
I'd be happy to do that. I don't know if we want first come, first serve, or
I
we
will
could
be
do the.
gone in June, so.
Okay, well, you're out
I'm-
then.
I'm out.
You're out.
We had a master plan subcommittee stuff. Maybe we should use that.
Yeah, I'm happy to
I don't remember who else was on it.
involve.
Trying to remember. Do you remember? We'll figure it out and let you know. But yes.
Okay,
I can
I'll
get a
I'll
couple
send out a
people.
couple of potential dates and times.
Okay,
if that
sounds
works.
good. Yep, after the 20th.
It's a narrow
Rob,
window.
Jen, or Kristen, you've got questions?
Will all these documents be available on the website?
So I knew this question was going to come up, and there's this period of time where I feel like we're working on something that's very preliminary, and I don't want everybody sending us and Jen feedback or assuming that you read. I mean, there's some stuff in here that I can tell you right now I don't see us doing, and everyone would hate. And I don't want somebody to copy that. Yeah, we can have the summary. But as far as the whole entire, this, I don't think it's ready. I think we can do another round, have a draft, and then put it out and continue to modify it. But I'm just afraid there's some stuff in here right now that people will
Sounds
interpret
good, I didn't know how far in the
wrong,
process
or
it
not
would
wrong,
be
but like
Another opportunity for
public
feedback.
input. Yeah, definitely. Does
Just
that-
one thing with this audit, it is meant to be a reference document for the board. You could, if you wanted to, incorporate it into the master plan, but it is meant to be for reference. It is not a document that has to be adopted
Right.
by the town. The master plan chapter, ultimately, that is the goal, to have it be adopted. But this document does
Right.
not need to be.
And it's so like she said, some of these things it could almost be standalone, so it's like a toolbox. Here's 20 things that we could do, and here's what that might look like. It's not saying anything about what we might actually want to do, and yeah, so.
I do have one other thought, and I think, Kristen's explained why, like a little more work on it, but certainly under the statewide Tanola law, anybody can come in tomorrow and get a copy of that. So I think that a lot of us have copies, and it can go out. It just wouldn't be posted on the town website, perhaps. And any people that were interested in giving feedback,
Right.
sure. I mean, there's no secrets here. That's why.
But without context, just kind of blasting it out there.
Right, that might be
maybe.
a better way. If we wanted a copy, could we get a copy?
Yes.
And the planning office is open Monday through Thursday,
Thanks.
so any other time.
But if it's okay with the board, I'm happy to at least have the full survey results. They are already
I was just gonna say,
available
they are already available online. So
So,
on this document, there is a URL to the full survey results. So if we can just post this, then they can have access to that.
I can also just include the link that is to all 66 pages worth of comments.
I don't know that comments are gonna necessarily be helpful. I think the data, I like numbers though, so.
I agree.
Chris-
And we
Kristen,
did,
there's 2 more.
yeah, Liz?
So I had a question, did you say that attached accessory dwelling units, one of them is currently allowed in Brentwood?
Yes, it's required to be under state law. There are some circumstances where it cannot be allowed, but in
Okay.
general, yes, it is allowed.
And then there's no requirements on what it looks like or anything, whether,
Oh, yeah.
There,
yeah.
there are criteria
Oh, there are
of
criteria.
size
It can't
and
be-
other.
it has to be a certain portion, it can't be too much bigger
One
than the
third, no
house.
more than 1,500 square feet.
Okay,
Like,
I think it's
like Road.
less than that.
but is that fairly recent? Because we had no accessory dwelling units before,
No,
right?
we had this for probably 15 years.
Yeah,
But we have had
at
it
least
for
15 years.
There was a
Maybe
somewhat
900 square
recent redefinition of what attached meant.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, well, we always declared that they had to be attached.
But
And then people got creative.
Yes.
So we redefined what we meant by
Yes.
detached.
What do you mean by?
But the state law changed in like 2015 and said every community has to have it. But in Rockingham County, 65% of the communities already had ADU allowances. The state wanted to get at the other 90% of the rest of the state that didn't have one.
So is attached like the breezeway goes across, where it's attached that the rooms are attached?
Well, I think we say now basically it has to be a warm
Enclosed.
connection between the two.
Okay, so you
frames.
can't just go underneath the breezeway into the
No.
garage. Okay,
Not
good
anymore.
to know.
And we still can hold people to setbacks and things, like anything you would normally have with a
Yeah,
house,
sewer,
stuff like that,
not
yeah.
sewer, but septic.
Septic, yeah.
Now, the
Becky?
interesting thing, or the interesting idea out before the legislature is this idea of forcing all towns to allow two accessory dwelling units. Does that say, if you're familiar with the proposed law, does it give the option for attached or detached? Or is it-
So I could be wrong, so I don't want to give incorrect information. My understanding is that it's enabling legislation that would allow towns to, but it doesn't necessarily require towns to allow a second. Doug, is that your understanding?
Yeah,
Have they modified it? Because I thought it was allowing two by right.
Oh, okay. I could be mistaken then.
It's been tweaked. Okay, it's been tweaked.
Oh,
Um,
it's tweaked, okay.
And
I
it,
thought it was attached or detached, right?
it,
One.
the original bill was telling towns you have to allow one of each, no questions.
Interesting. I wonder if maybe it was amended, or maybe I'm just mistaken.
I'm hoping it's been amended. But it also said that it gives the local community very little control over it. The only thing that it did say was we could require one of those to be workforce, to meet the requirements of workforce housing,
Okay.
cost-wise, but.
See, old timers, Liz, the idea of having an attached dwelling unit, and it says it maintain the appearance of a single-family home. That was a good thing, but this would be a sea change if the state legislature requires towns to allow two,
Yeah, that's
especially if one is
Oh,
detached,
oh.
you'd be effectively doubling the number of houses potentially
that's
in
a
the
big
town.
difference.
I will say, I'll have to look, because I'm really curious if maybe the bill was amended or if I just had an incorrect understanding. But hypothetically, if it was a requirement allowing a second, I would think that the governor would probably veto that. That's just a guess,
Yeah,
but.
an override though,
We can talk about that later.
Yeah, I've heard
Yeah.
directly different descriptions of what the governor's feeling would be.
Oh, really? Okay.
There's-
On the required second one.
Okay.
There's
Because
a,
his stance is so strong about increasing the housing stock statewide.
Right.
And he put together that housing commission, and it's one of their key bills right now.
Okay.
I'm only
So
gonna say
I think
two
he-
more things
I think he won't.
about this, because I feel strongly about it. One is, where's the evidence that doing that will create what we're trying to create? And two, I think the motivation behind it was just to do away with local planning and zoning, based on my understanding of the origins of.
You have strong feelings about this.
I do have strong feelings about it. Sorry, Becky.
I had two questions. It may not be the appropriate time for one, but you talked about the diversity of housing.
Mhm.
Are there issues or requirements for a town to have to monitor apartments, landlords, units, all of that, what infrastructure, what management needs to come along
Um,
to diversify your?
So there is not generally any requirement of should you have X number of apartments.
Right.
And if you do have legally defined affordable units, so either they can be owned or rented,
Yeah.
there are a variety of tools for how towns can manage that. The existing workforce housing units in Brentwood, and correct me if I'm wrong, Glenn, are all deed restricted and they are for ownership only.
Right.
When you start getting into rental units, that becomes a much more of an administrative, I'll say, burden on a town to ensure those units, if they're rental units, remain affordable, and it usually involves a requirement with any approval that a management company is overseeing it, and then the town becomes responsible for ensuring the management company is overseeing it. So there is that next component of it that does become difficult.
Second corollary, you mentioned that the tax issue that people expressed some concern with additional housing.
Mm-hmm.
I've had access to some studies that say development doesn't ease a tax burden. Because of the infrastructure and the services that are required for additional housing, it puts pressure on the infrastructure of a town, and it does affect the houses, the taxes do go up. Do you have access to that study?
In general, development does increase the tax requirements.
Yeah.
But with housing specifically, the topic that typically comes up is the school system.
Right.
There is a lot more variability to just because you are, I'm just going to not talk about age restricted, but general housing, because your school is already there, the physical building is already there, and most municipalities in New Hampshire are under capacity in their schools. So just because you're adding some more housing does not necessarily mean your school cost directly goes up. There is a point where it does.
Right.
But most towns are not directly experiencing that because people are having less children. School enrollment is going down, and for the most part, we are aging out and getting older. So there are simply less children to educate.
Then my last question or point is, I think conservation had a representative on the the capital improvement or the master planning committee. I would like to see that continue if it's going to affect open space or if there are concerns about the kind of developments. So in that early conversation, I think conservation should be represented.
Okay, yeah, I think you might be thinking of the capital improvements plan.
No,
Was it
on the
No,
master
it was-
plan?
It
Okay.
was on the master plan.
We need to
You're
figure out
right.
who was on that committee and get it back together, yeah.
It was
Yeah,
on
it's
the
been a
master
while,
plan.
but you're right, there was
Yes.
someone from the
Yeah.
town.
Because I sat in on one of those meetings.
Yeah.
So just clarification, I was just looking at the amended language, and the way I'm interpreting it sounds like Bruce is right, that the bill would, so it says, one accessory dwelling unit which may be attached or detached shall be allowed as a matter of right, and a second accessory dwelling unit shall be allowed as a matter of right. And it does say later that the municipality can require the second one to be attached. But it sounds like you're correct, that was mistaken, yeah, so.
So I guess the takeaway here is whether residents of Brentwood like it or not, Brentwood is going to grow at some point. Right now with this artificial bubble, real estate bubble, they can make more money building these like we're seeing here last week, $1.2, $3, $4 million homes. So the pressure's not gonna come on the town of Brentwood. The state's not gonna come after the town of Brentwood for workforce housing. But the pinch point is when somebody files a suit in Superior Court against the town and say, hey, look, your ordinances don't allow this. It is a bona fide right under state law. That's when push comes to shove and the town is gonna have to do something. Or Lincoln best explain it, but I mean, I've always been the impression that if the town refused something like workforce housing and there was a viable place to put it in town, somebody proposed it, and it met all the rules and regulations, that Brentwood, us residents can't just say, oh, we don't like that. The Superior Court judge stamps the plan, and it goes over to registry and is recorded, and the town is completely out of the picture. So it's better to be able to have some management abilities built into your ordinances than to wait till somebody pushes you in court to the point where the judge makes that decision.
I think I've heard you say that before, where it's gonna happen either way, we might as well give it some guardrails
Yep.
and kind of guide it where we as a town would prefer to have it go.
Maybe just implement,
Proactive.
if it's the simplest first step to re-implement the affordable or the workforce housing, it's not going to happen today because it just doesn't work economically, but at least it's a minor baby step toward showing that we're somewhat responsible or
Right.
somewhat aware of what the laws are.
I do want to say, just being willing to have the conversation is a step that many communities have not even started to take. So you're ahead of the curve on that.
Is there a summary of what towns have done recently? I know a lot of towns are in the middle of this, but the last round of voting, did you see any good solutions or ideas?
I didn't see any real great solutions in Rockingham County. A lot of towns are in the middle of this planning, so I think in
Yeah.
the next 2 or 3 years you're going to see a lot. Probably the biggest one that's happened in recent years is in Hampton. They had a creation of an overlay district. It was called their Liberty Lane Overlay District. It's kind of near the Route 1
Oh,
1 and
yeah.
101.
It used to be all offices and they're turning into apartments, right?
They have made it so it can be used for mixed use.
Oh.
Which they actually had a developer come in and propose a project which didn't meet their zoning. Then they went back and they worked with them to have a discussion of creating the rules for this overlay district. It's a very small part of the town of Hampton, but it kind of gets to the planned unit development that's kind of called out in there. And there will be some, from the proposal, my understanding is there will be some workforce housing as part of that.
You know, Hampton's is in a different situation than the outlying towns, and they have that water and sewage infrastructure.
I will say that part of town does not have water. It doesn't have sewer. It does have
So,
water.
yeah, the water is for the new retirement community there, or the assisted living community.
I believe so, yeah. So, they are a different community, but that probably is one of the better examples I've seen.
Okay. Thank you.
And I would just, Bruce, to your point, I mean, there were reasons the town repealed those two ordinances, and I would encourage the board to be creative, and there's ways to tweak them, such as density. I don't think people are generally against age
No, I
55
think
pluses at that
I'll say
time.
myself, it was anti-growth, just anti-growth in general.
Well,
Shut
or
it
maybe it wasn't done right, and they could be creative, and I think you and I talked, maybe you could combine one of these multi-use and say, age, 55 plus gives some benefits where affordability people might be negative. Why not put them together? Why not have an ordinance that says if you're gonna do 55 plus, you have to do some affordable or and somehow mix it
That's
to be
that's what.
more of a neutral
helping us
tax.
With your, yeah, it makes a lot of sense, you're right, there's a lot
Yeah,
of
so
options.
instead of just saying, hey, let's just revise, just let's put back on what
If
we
you
had.
think we can just put our head in the sand and just wait, it's not very smart, it's not planning, it's,
So there's
Sure.
another grant, right, that would actually help us?
So
Maybe that's
they are going to have a second round of the grant that's providing the funding for this work. It hasn't come out explicitly yet. We expect it in the next few weeks, but to actually be able to help implement regulations. So that is an option. We can also, under that grant, potentially do more education and outreach if that is necessary, or it can be done in combination with a regulation. So as soon as that becomes available, I'll certainly pass it along. But we do expect it to be sizable as far as grant dollars, and anyone already doing a grant gets priority.
Oh,
great.
Is the grant federally or state? Who
And
pays for that?
for the second round, it is actually going to be state funding that they just got approval for. It's 2.9 million.
And the original concept?
The original was federal money.
Okay.
But now we have a lot of food for thought and information from the community and this toolbox. But, we would need help to
To implement, there is some
come up
funding
with some
coming, so.
specifics, yeah. Okay. All right, well, thank you. So so everybody get feedback to you? Is that okay?
Yep, I'll write up an email that sort of says, some dates that are a little far out, so you have time. I'll try to meet with you and the master plan committee, which I think is also you, Stephanie, and maybe another person. And I'll come back on June. It's okay. And I'll come back on June 6th, and we'll have an additional conversation.
Okay, and just so everybody on the board knows, this needs to be completed by July 31st
Yep.
under the grant. So we've got a little bit of time, but we'll need to,
But not a lot.
but not a lot.
No, not a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thanks, Jen.
Yeah, thank you. second guest this evening.
Do people wanna go do anything, or?
Yeah, it's like 1,000,000 degrees in here.
Okay, yeah. All right. Come
Well,
back
take your
at
jacket off.
7:25.
It wouldn't matter. It's really hot in here,
8 minutes.
right?
Say that
Can you
again?
call it up?
Yep, don't you worry.
And do we have a button, or can I just say next slide?
You can say next slide.
That's beautiful.
You guys want to?
I got you all set up.
That's beautiful.
Here, I'll even go over
Turn
there.
off your microphone.
Or do you want,
when
here,
take a
you
break.
slide over one. turn your microphones back on, please, and thank you.
Mic on. Your mic on.
Turn it over to Glenn, and I will switch places with you.
I thought I would just stand right
You
here
can, okay.
and loom over Bruce.
How that happened.
Because I never get to, because he's 17 inches taller than me.
And I know really well.
You don't have
Kristen,
to
can you
stand.
just hit the camera
Nobody
button
can
again?
Well,
Thank you.
Is it working?
Now it is.
is it working?
It is.
But you can go off that page?
And I can highlight. You can see notes.
That's exciting.
Do you want to drive?
Can I just say first that this is
Absolutely.
part of a cooperative effort with the Conservation Commission to have some folks come in and talk to us about some basic principles or more complex principles.
Can they
To
bring
help
their
us.
chairs up closer, everybody that
Yeah.
wants to, it's very informal
Wanna-
here,
See a little better?
about 10 to 15 feet.
Nope.
You really honestly don't need it now with the big screens that we have here
I know, right?
in the town hall.
We don't charge.
All right, sorry Glenn, go.
No worries.
Go ahead.
So this is really informal. I have this PowerPoint. We can stray from it as much as we want to. The goal here is to just talk about our wetland resource and how we here in Brentwood regulate the wetland resource. And because there's really 3 phases of wetland regulation, I will touch on each of the phases. But the further away from the community we get, of course, the less I understand because I don't have to deal with it. So when I talk about the federal requirements and the federal permits and whatnot, I never deal with those. When I talk about the state permitting that we'll talk about, I do deal with that. And then, of course, I deal with our local regulations regarding it all the time. And so the goal really was just to talk about how we take care of our wetlands here in town. And just a couple of things up front. The town was really one of the first in the county to have a wetlands ordinance. I think the first one got adopted back in like 1983, which was really early. It was really early. There was a big push for a lot of natural resource ordinance work that was done in the 90s, but to have one that was done in the early 80s, really pretty remarkable. So there's always been a strong tradition in Brentwood regarding support of wetland resources. And it's good because there's a ton of wetland resource in Brentwood. The Conservation Commission, it scares me to think, but I think it's been a decade or so, did a natural resource inventory. And that inventory, because my memory isn't great, I probably could have looked at it earlier. I think we have about 25% of our community constituted with wetlands, which is a large amount of wetlands. That's a lot of wetland resource. It goes all the way back to when the Atlantic Ocean came to Route 125. So we have an incredible wetland resource. From a planning side, from the private planning side, it's a problem because it's a real constraint. But as our culture has evolved, protection of wetlands is a really important endeavor. And so the town has always taken it very seriously. We continue to, and I just want to have this discussion so that we all understand sort of what we're doing. And wetland resource protection is an ongoing thing. I mean, the ordinance that we adopted in 1983 is drastically different than the one we have now, and I would assume that the one we have now will be seen to be less than most productive at some point, and we'll come up with another way to protect wetlands. So it's definitely an evolving enterprise. All right, if you don't mind.
I don't.
So we have to, because of the way the permitting and regulatory structure goes, we have to understand that there are 3 definitions of wetlands that we have to worry about. There's one at the federal level, there's one on the next page at the state level, and then there's the one that we have that defines wetlands. They all differ, but they all basically say the same thing. They all say that in order for a wetland to be delineated as a wetland, it requires three things. It requires a certain type of soil, it requires a certain amount of hydrology, water, and it requires a certain type of vegetation to be present in order for a wetland to be determined to be a wetland. So there are gradations of difference between the three definitions, but they all basically say that same premise. So when you go out and look at wetland resources, a wetland scientist or a soil scientist are looking at those three parameters. Now, our ordinance goes further.
Which
and
one? This one?
If you'll go one more.
Okay.
Our ordinance used to just say that once you delineated the wetlands, we'd break them into two kinds of wetlands. A hydric A wetland, which was the most inundated, the most hydrology, the greatest volume, and the most important to protect. And we said that wetland would have a 100-foot buffer. And then there was a hydric B, which are all of those three parameters still, but in lesser amounts or lesser degree, and required less of a setback. It's pretty simplistic. It really, beyond defining it as hydric A or hydric B, there was no real science behind it. And for anybody old enough to remember, there's a gentleman very popular and well-known in Rockingham County. His name was Jim Hayden. He was the soil conservationist for the what used to be the SCS, the Soil Conservation Service. And when I sat down the first time as the planner back in 1987, he said, Glenn, wetlands are all different, and you need to think of them as being very different. Except we developed ordinances that didn't say that they were very different. Well, ours now is different. Our ordinance now says that all wetlands aren't the same, that all wetlands have the capacity to do a number of functions, and if they do more functions, they're more deserving of protection than those that do fewer functions. So our entire ordinance now is predicated upon protecting those that create or that provide the greatest number of wetland functions, as opposed to working our way down to those that don't really provide much of a function at all. And so we can go through and look at what these functions are. I don't want people to really concentrate on that. I just want them to understand, well, here, before we go through there, what do wetlands function? Why do they function? What do they do for us? When you think of a wetland, what does it do? Habitat? Store water. I mean, those are the two biggies that everybody knows about. Those, and they're really important, especially that store water one. That store water one, a great example. So the largest city in the United States that doesn't have zoning at all is Houston. And when Hugo hit, and just spun around for 4 days, just dumping feet and feet of water on that poor community, they had no response because they had developed in a way that didn't think stormwater management was an important thing to worry about. It's a really important thing to worry about. And wetlands there are castle moats located all over the town. They are the one resource that absolutely, in these times of, I'm not going to say climate change, I'm going to say in these times where we're seeing greater frequency of storms and storms that are more intense, that ability to manage and hold that water someplace is really important. And one of the fact that we have preserved our wetlands so well in town will serve us well in the future, because it looks like it's only going to get worse. So beyond those two functions of habitat and water retention, if we just go through them, the first one, one back. Yeah, is this flood flow alteration. That's the capacity to hold that stormwater in a way that lets it disperse at a slower rate, at a less dangerous rate. And that is, it is the number one important feature of a wetland. Next, groundwater recharge and discharge, holding those waters in place for long periods of time allow that very important feature of water seeping down into the ground from where it's located to recharge aquifers. Because although we are very fortunate in the state of New Hampshire to seldom run into the instance where you drop a straw into the ground and you can't get water, that is not the case nationwide. And when we have had, like we've just come out of a couple of years ago, a really sustained about 11-year drought, where people were dropping straws and not finding water. Had never been the case in New Hampshire. And the last couple of years of really sustained water from the skies has helped to bring us back to a state where people aren't dropping straws and not finding water. Because that is the tradition in New Hampshire. You can find water when you drop a well. And we take that for granted. We take it for granted. So that it's a really important function for wetlands to accomplish. We'll go to that next slide. Sediment and pollution retention. It's funny because we do a lot of regulating for wetlands to keep pollutants out of the wetland. The whole scope of stormwater management work that's really taken off in the last decade is to keep pollutants out of the wetlands. But they are naturally really good at filtering those pollutants. It's much better to keep pollutants out of them, but if we weren't taking that step, it's one of the things they're really good at doing, because they have a diversity of plant life that allows a lot of uptake of things that you don't want making its way into the groundwater, and it gets taken care of at that level. And so on to the next one. And our ordinance has 9 functions and values that we feel are important enough to have an impact on what the buffer is from our wetlands. And that's what each of these are. So fish and shellfish habitat, really important, really something that wetlands do, only surpassed by actual lakes and streams. But the second sort of course of where these resources lie are in our wetlands. Next one. Sediment and shoreline stabilization. Predominantly when wetlands abut either ponds or rivers, they serve, because of their ability to disperse the intensity of water that comes from high water periods, they are uniquely able to preserve the eroding of the shorelands, because that dispersal just slows the energy down that lots of accumulated water just has as a function of natural physics. And if those wetlands didn't exist, our shorelands would be much less stable than they are. One more. Production of nutrient export. This just goes to the fact that they provide and retain a lot of useful nutrients for both the plants and wildlife that need the wetlands to survive. Next one. The corollary of providing that nutrient is that they also serve to provide for removal and retention of those same things if those resources aren't used by either plant life or wildlife. So it's sort of a yin and yang, but the point is that wetlands, in this instance, take care of both the yin and the yang. Wildlife habitat, as everyone knows, you go to a nice wetland area, you see all sorts of things you don't see anywhere else. And threatened or endangered species is one that, and all of these functions fall in line with the Army Corps of Engineers wetland delineation method. And that's actually the wetland delineation method that we use in the town of Brentwood to determine whether an area of these kinds of circumstances exists are an actual wetland. So and then there's just one more, I believe, and it should be right there. Vernal pools. These vernal pools aren't a function. Vernal pools are just a really unique wetland habitat that, if it exists, gets our largest buffer, because they're odd in the world of wetlands because they don't even stay wet all year. But when they're wet, they provide habitat for some plants and animals that only can exist when they exist. And so the cycle, the environmental cycle that vernal pools provide for, if they go away, entire portions of our flora and fauna would go away. And they're really important, and that's why, without being a function of a wetland, but being a category in and of themselves, they just get our largest buffer from the get-go. Now, the point of going through all those things is just to say those are the things that a wetland can do. Some only do one. Some wetlands literally only retain water after a storm. That's all they do. For whatever reason, because of their location, they might be located in an already developed area, and so there's no interaction with any natural features on the ground. So that's all they do. We don't really care about those. They generally don't even rise to the level of getting a buffer at all, except under our ordinance. Under our ordinance, we still say 35 feet. It's important to mention that the state of New Hampshire, God bless them, have studied for years whether or not there should be a buffer to wetlands, and they've always determined that they're not necessary. That you can protect a wetland simply by not letting development destroy the boundaries of the wetland. It's so short-sighted. In the early 90s, they had a 2-year program that involved a lot of planners. We all got together, we came up with a series of buffer distances, and they just shot them all down and said that it's not necessary. And one of the reasons is because most of the scientific evidence out there says that our greatest buffer of 100 feet is really inadequate to provide the kind of protection that they deserve. So having 100 feet in Brentwood is really, it's remarkable. I'm glad that isn't something that we have done away with over time, because developers really don't like it. They would prefer that we default to the state's attitude and just let land be developed right up to the wetland delineation, and it's just crazy. It's just crazy. Next slide. Whoops.
How many?
2 back now, I think. Maybe 3 back.
This one?
Go back 1 more.
This one?
Yeah. So here are the wetlands permits that are most frequently seen when you're doing development. So the federal U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, there's actually a 401 permit, a 404 permit, and a 408 permit. And I'm really not sure what the difference is between them. But the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is granted the right to be the monitoring and enforcing and permitting agency for all navigable waterways in the nation. And so these permits are required when those instances are met. So navigable waterways would include the Exeter River, would include all of the ponds and lakes that are found in Kingston, but not isolated wetlands that wouldn't be considered navigable. So that's where the federal government is involved. The state government is involved through New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services with their dredge and fill permit. That's the most common permit that you see. It's granted by the state when there is going to be direct impact to a wetlands, to a wetland boundary or a wetland resource because of development. And the degree to which the impact can occur in the state of New Hampshire has drastically changed in the time that I've been here. The state held a very strong line on not allowing fill of wetlands for development purposes, except under really specific instances, until about the mid-1990s, when they came up with a mitigation plan that now says there's a way that you can pay in lieu and fill in wetlands. We haven't, our ordinance doesn't say that, but the state law does take precedence, so you can do that. It's not an inexpensive endeavor, but it is an endeavor that didn't exist 25 years ago.
If someone pays a mitigation fee, does that income come to the town where that happens? No.
No, the goal is, NHDES's goal with their ARM program is that the resources that are raised would be used in town. But the responsibility is that there have to be ways to use that money in town. And I have one handout I just wanted to share with the Conservation Commission after this. DES came up with a cute little short list of ways you can use that ARM money. And it's important that you have that list, that you have those projects in a near shovel-ready form, so that when somebody comes through that has needed to do that, because it's substantial. I think it's 10 times the value of the wetland that you disturbed, so it can be serious money. But if you don't have those projects available, they've broken the state up into, I think it's coincidence that there are 9 watersheds that they've broken the state into, because there are 9 counties, but they don't follow county lines. They follow watershed lines, and they will use that money in the watershed that your community is in, if you don't have those projects that you can point in their direction.
Yeah.
So, really, keep that list ready for them.
And ARM stands for
Aquatic mitigation.
Resource Mitigation.
Yeah, aquatic resource mitigation, yes. And it's provided a lot of good project money for wetland restoration projects. It's really, it's a good source of money, because developers really want to get rid of wetlands sometimes. They need to for their development plans to work.
I'm sorry. Did Epping get a lot of money in the town when they built Walmart and Lowe's? They got those mitigation ponds.
Yeah, no, I think that, a lot of that happened before ARM was in place.
Okay.
So I have no idea how much money they've had. I know that NHDES does keep a tally of what money's been raised and where it's been spent in different communities. You can.
And the town has
find
been
that.
successful, the Hague Road.
Right, that's the
River
one that I'm
project.
aware of.
We got about $75,000 to conserve the Wilson parcel and put in those stairs, the access stairs, and put in some wetland, synthetic wetlands. So we have successfully applied in the past for projects.
Yeah.
I think that donut shop proposal 125 was something like $175,000,
Yeah.
but we didn't have everything shovel ready to apply that to it.
Okay. And just at the local level, the wetlands ordinance has a conditional use permit that allows very limited activity to occur within the buffer of a wetland, nothing within the wetland. If you want to do something within the wetland, you have to go through the variance process in the town. And variances are supposed to be very hard to get, so the protective measure there is, we're still saying wetlands really aren't supposed to be disturbed. Now, there are odd instances where even someone who supports wetlands as much as I do was in favor of, annihilating an entire wetland. For the Prescott property,
I was gonna ask about
I
that, that
was-
artificial wetland that they created.
I mean, there was a wetland there before the development went in. It, like a glorified vernal pool.
Yeah.
I believe it held water year-round, but it was basically a depression. And so that was a created wetland, but once, in the state of New Hampshire, once you create a wetland, it becomes a wetland. And you can't just say, well, I made it, so I get to unmake it. No, when you make it, you've acted like God, and now that's a wetland. And
What if
so-
you make it by accident?
But if you, there have been instances
Well, there's
where
a house,
tire ruts.
there's a house that I drive by on Middle Road, and there is a wetland there pretty frequently when it rains.
Tire ruts have been known to create wetland areas. And those wetlands don't go away. So, and that's not it's not a bad thing if the way you're going to protect them somehow is connected to what function they serve. A tractor truck, no matter how big, that rut isn't gonna give you, a 6-function wetland. It just isn't.
Well, and on the point about zoning and exceptions, do you usually see some coordination between planning boards and zoning boards when questions like that come up?
Oh, I would love to say yes, but no, the answer is no.
Yeah.
There's just there's such autonomous boards with their own responsibilities that it doesn't happen very often. Now, there have been times when the planning board has asked me to write letters about when we've sent applicants to the ZBA for something, to at least explain why we're sending them and what we consider the issues to be. And I know that there have been times when planning board members have chosen to go to ZBA meetings so that there's some interaction between the two boards and some understanding of what the background may be. But it isn't a natural relationship that we, sit down and have dinner.
That's very politely put.
And there was a time, when I first started, there was a very short time, when Mike Hero was the chairman of the ZBA, and this crazy guy named Bruce Stevens was the chairman of the planning board. And for a couple of years, we did have one meeting where we would get together and talk, mainly for the ZBA to tell us if they were seeing repeat zoning requests, if they were seeing variances for the same thing over and over again. Maybe the zoning ordinance needs to be looked at. And that's something that should happen more frequently than it does, but it just doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. It might happen if you had a full-time planner. Could happen, so maybe that's something the board should consider in the future. Because things are always, and that was not an attempt for me to be.
Talking about that.
Yeah, that was not.
I don't work, you don't work with anyone else.
I need a job.
I am way less hairy than I used to be, and
Would a motion be ordered?
I'm too old for that nonsense. But I've gotta say, that kind of interaction would happen more frequently if you had a planner in-house that was here every day of the week. There are towns the size of Brentwood that do have full-time planners, but there are tons of towns twice the size of Brentwood that don't have full-time planners. It's crazy. New Hampshire's a crazy place. A crazy place. Okay, and the last thing I want to say about the permits here, that last statement, although not an individual permit, the town stormwater management ordinance establishes standards for treatment of stormwater for all non-residential development. And the treatment of stormwater is really important, and because we have so many wetlands, the treatment of stormwater is basically done so that that stormwater can make its way into the wetland. That's the way it works. You're cleaning out, you're making sure that whatever the highest degree of cleansing of that stormwater that you can achieve through different engineered responses then allows that water to be drained into the wetland. So the stormwater management ordinance that was was adopted by the town about 8 years ago, maybe. And every time I say that, it's probably more because
You have to add 2 for COVID.
I'm of a certain age
Probably
where
decade.
the memory
Decade, yeah.
gets shorter. But it's a really important, it was a really important step for the town to take.
It's really been beneficial to have Glenn be our town planner, even though it's part-time, because you also cover 3 or 4 other towns.
Yeah, 3 other towns.
3 other towns, so you're seeing what's out there, what engineers are presenting, what issues coming up, all these other surrounding towns, so it's been that's a benefit to Brentwood, but,
It's a benefit to me.
well,
Next slide. So there's one of the unfortunate things about wetlands is first off, those 3 definitions, they all do differ. And wetland science is also an art because it's done by individuals who are very much human, and 2 individuals can go out in a wetland and see 2 different things. And often we see that because often we have a developer's wetland scientist looking at a site, and then we pay someone to act on our behalf, and that wetland scientist sees things slightly different. So the art of wetland science is interesting, and it's compounded by the fact that the way that a wetland gets mapped can change how big or how small the wetland is, just to make things even more confusing. So just in Brentwood, it's very possible that we would look at 4 or 5 different wetland delineations for the same wetland resource. Now, the only 2 that matter for Brentwood are the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers wetland delineation, because that's what our ordinance requires, and the very bottom one, Town of Brentwood Prime Wetland Study, that the Conservation Commission had Mark West do for the town a decade or so ago. And so 2007, so that's more than a decade, Glenn. That was really a very smart thing for the town to do. And I say that because in the state, there are only 33 communities that have prime wetlands. And there are 236 communities in the state of New Hampshire. So 30 of them have prime wetlands. Only 7 of those have been authorized by NHDES and the state's enabling legislation to enforce the 100-foot setback. And Brentwood is one of those 7. So that's an incredibly strong example of the importance that the town has always put on its wetland resource.
Should that be updated at any point?
Well, wetlands can change, but not drastically.
Okay.
Not drastically.
And I think the key thing is because at the time it seemed like we were treating all wetlands just as A or B or whatever that was. And we were running into the case where you have a puddle someplace that got designated a wetland, and people decided we can't treat them all the same. Let's protect the most important ones the most.
That
was, I think, like you said, a good way to do it, because then it gave the ZBA and other people more guidance on what are the most important, and let's really protect those.
That's right.
Not bend at all, and let's look at the others differently.
That's right. That's right.
That was a great idea. Whose idea was that? Was that yours, Glenn?
Well, it was the Conservation Commission hired Mark.
Yeah, I think John Ellis maybe was.
I mean, I remember talking to members of the Conservation Commission and telling them that I thought it was a great idea, but it certainly wasn't my idea.
I think it did come out of the planning board, because we were constantly running into this is holding up a reasonable development because it's a puddle, and someone called it a wetland, and, you know, we don't need to protect every one of those, and trying to differentiate, I think, at the time with Bruce helped.
well, that's it, and they were going for variances, and some of the variances were reasonable.
And some weren't.
Some of them were not,
Some
so
were
this
not.
is a uniform way of
Yeah.
keeping track of that. And, you know, you got a lot of input into that throughout the time, so.
And Mark West is a really great wetland scientist. So, I mean, if you're gonna have someone do the work for you, you picked a really good one.
It might not be a bad idea to have him preliminary look over the work that he'd done before, just to see if you saw any aberrations that.
He's still out there working.
Yeah.
He-
Go ahead, go ahead.
He would definitely do it, I am sure. Next slide, please. So I think this is the last slide, so it's just a summary kind of thing. So barring unusual circumstances, construction in wetland areas is prohibited. We talked a little bit about that example over at the Russell Prescott property. The Brentwood zoning ordinance has a sliding scale for buffer distances. The state of New Hampshire requires no buffers. God, that's just so short-sighted. The wetlands ordinance, we have our 100-foot setback for construction, but septic systems can be placed within 75 feet of wetlands. And so a properly working septic system, 75 feet from a wetland, poses no problem at all. The problem is improperly working septic systems can pose a problem. But what they are likely to do is put extra nutrients into the wetland. And so likely plant life is going to mitigate that, but you don't want that happening 1,000 times. It would, a wetland could probably handle one septic system malfunctioning completely easily, but 60 of them, and all of a sudden it's not the same circumstance. But that's state law, and that isn't going to change. And then finally, the town zoning ordinance allows certain activities to occur in the wetlands buffer areas, either as a right or as a part of conditional use permit. The ones that are allowed by right, things having to do with like putting up, if you're going to do pathways in a wetland, you're allowed to put in the wharfs and whatnot. It's really low impact activity. And then the conditional use permit is because we do allow a site plan to show an access way in a buffer area. So if you need to get around your building or something for fire protection, or if the way to get on your property because of a large wetland resource is that you have to be in the buffer, we allow that, but only after the planning board has looked at that proposal.
But they should be trying to use not areas that don't impact it first?
Yes.
Versus,
Yes.
it's like in a constrained situation, but not,
And
we just want a bigger building, so we're gonna do everything.
And what we like to see is that they show that they have done some sort of mitigation within that design to take away the danger that might be presented to that wetland.
I mean, just at the last meeting, you moved the path, right? Because they wanted to have it within the buffer, and you were like,
Yes.
just move it.
Yes. And he did.
Yeah.
He did. So that's all I wanted to put on slides, but the discussion, if anybody has questions or, the goal is always to understand that wetlands are important. And the ancillary goal is not to be quite as militant as we were early on in thinking that all wetlands are equal, because they simply aren't. They simply aren't. And if you don't understand that, you're doing a disservice really to everyone.
Makes sense. Can you just give a brief, you didn't talk about like what the actual setbacks were. When you have all these factors, how variable are the setbacks? Or is it,
The least setback we allow is 35 feet, and our greatest is 100 feet.
and there's some criteria, it has to meet 8 of these, or there's some point system or something?
There is a point system.
Okay.
And it's basically, you either get 1 point, 2 points, or 3 points, depending upon what function the wetland actually
And then we
provides.
have, if it's below this, it has this 35, if it's between this and this, it's whatever.
It's
and if
55 or 75 or up to 100.
So we have 4.
I think there are more.
Yeah, there are,
Yeah.
I think that there are more.
Okay. 'Cause
Oh, I was looking at that online.
seems new, and again, when we look at plans, we'll see that, or how will we know? We'll just show the wetland setback, and we'll know that that everyone checked that it's the right setback.
Well,
on
that-
construction.
Here's a good thing to point out. Requiring the functional valuation study is an increased cost to development. So when we were talking earlier about what towns can do to lessen the costs of things like housing, the way we do it now is more expensive than the way we used to do it, because all they had to do before was a delineation, a line, and say whether it was hydric A soil or hydric B soil. And then we put that 50 or 100 feet. Now they do have to do a study that the Conservation Commission can ask for at any time. The study that determined what they found their buffer to be. And sometimes, if they know that they're going to have a high functioning, they just forego doing the study and they just say, we're comfortable putting the 100-foot buffer on it because we know we might end up with 85 feet, but that it's not worth the money and the time to do that study. We'll accept the 100-foot buffer.
And that study has to be done by a wetland scientist.
Yes, certified wetland scientist. And both wetland scientists and soil scientists are certified in the state of New Hampshire. So there's a educational criteria that they have to have. There's an on-site number of hours that they have to have, and there's continuing education that they have to do every year.
And so their license is at risk, their license is at risk when they stamp that plan if it's not appropriate. But then in our case, the town's expert will peer review that.
Correct.
It's kind of a check and balance.
Can you talk a little bit about wetlands and poorly drained soils and the relationship to lot size and what's developable?
Yeah, I mean, we used to predicate our lot size in town upon the viability of building for the soil that was present on the site. And so in those old days, every one of the mapping criteria that was on that slide of the 5 was high-intensity soil surveys. That used to be what was required. And those surveys require that either a soils or a wetland scientist show you what the drainage class is for the property, what the soil matrix is, what the slope is, and all of those things go into determining how large the lot can be. We only require greater than 2 acres in a residential zone if they can't show 25,000 square feet of upland soil. You can almost always do that. But our requirement is 2 acres.
And for density, like calculating how many for a bigger project?
It's still reliant upon them being able to show that they can meet 2 acres and 200 feet of frontage.
How would that work with adding on wells? You still have to,
It's all shot out of the water.
okay.
It's all, I mean, the first round of allowing 1 accessory dwelling unit on every single family lot basically said, we're allowing for twice the density
Right.
of residences that you presently have. Now, they're not as big as the residences that exist.
No, but you could have like 3 on the 2 acre.
Well, that's what they're saying now, maybe.
But of course, that's part of the cost of an ADU is the research that goes into determining what additional septic requirements
Right.
are.
Yeah.
You may have to add to your field, which is
So what happens if something is by right, but then when you start doing the math, under our ordinance, you wouldn't be able to have a bigger building, or you wouldn't, there's no,
There really
those
isn't,
2 things kind of clash.
there isn't really a natural progression from one to the other after the lot has been developed. Now, maybe this requirement that there be 2 accessory dwelling units on every lot means that we should, I don't know, have someone in-house that can do that for us. I mean, I would imagine that the Rockingham County Conservation District's wetland scientist, Mike Cuomo, who actually reviews all our septic plans, would be able to provide us guidance on that.
I mean, you still can't build in a wetland, where you
Oh,
can't.
yeah, you still can't.
You can't get close to the buffer that our ordinance will allow.
Correct.
You still have the dimensional setbacks to lot lines, so not every house lot in Brentwood would qualify for an additional 1 or 2 ADUs.
But following up.
But
on
most
that-
of them would,
Oh, most of them.
most of them would.
Following up on that, I mean, now, the development plan that was originally made was predicated their stormwater management on a certain amount of impervious surface and everything else. And now all of a sudden, we're gonna go in and add all this, and it may not meet some of our other, for what it was designed, now all of a sudden, these systems are all inadequate, and we're not treating the stormwater, and it's getting into the creeks. and
Maybe the response I would have for that is because there is a limit on size of what the units can be, and because we have a large lot size,
Yeah.
that I doubt that even 2 accessory dwelling units would on most lots have put you anywhere higher in the threshold for that stormwater management.
What is our building envelope? We have a minimum building envelope on newly created lots.
Well, this law also, not law, bill says that we can't set the minimum or the max, whatever. We can't, we have to allow it to be at least 1,000 square feet
Oh, yeah, thousands, but I mean, what is our
No.
building,
to
that building envelope we have is how many?
We don't
5,000?
really have a building envelope. We say that you have to be able to show that they're 25,000 square feet,
25,000
which is
square feet.
half an acre.
Half an acre, which the average house may be 1,900 square feet, so
Yeah.
there's plenty
Of space there.
of space. So it shouldn't impact that much on drainage, but it could have a specific situation.
But I would bet that there are instances where it would most definitely have an impact.
So the town could change its ordinance to incorporate an extra buffer with the expectation that there might be this extra units.
When the building permit was applied for, and the person does their foundation certification, you would pick up that information, then it seems like it'd be viable, reasonable to, require an adjustment if necessary. But again, because the building envelopes required so large, they're 10 times what a house size is.
That's assuming it's not an existing building. If it's an existing building, then.
Yeah, and
Yes,
non-conforming
correct.
lots, there,
Yeah.
we, tons of them, all over the place. Some people live in them. Indeed, indeed.
I'm telling you, we could fit a whole bunch of people in the barn. Just let me build ADUs.
Okay, we're not gonna have that.
Just since ADUs have been such a big topic of the night, and it seems like there's strong opinions maybe on both sides, is the town planning to submit any opinion as to what we would like to see to our legislators?
Well, one of them was here and we expressed our opinion, and it was not split, I don't think. I think everybody
He
was.
was basically run out of town on a rail.
I
He
think I
was-
might have been at that
He was,
You
he was also one of the presenters of the bill, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But he's just one, I mean, that's not, that feedback isn't getting to the broader audience when this bill is discussed.
Yeah, I don't know what we're allowed to do as a board in terms of lobbying versus, as individuals, we can.
You
Reach
still
out,
write
but-
letters to them, you can't offer them money, but
But the planning board or the
We
town
can
can't
absolutely
say,
not offer the money, you're right.
right, but we can.
Your mic is hot.
Yeah, that's
Do you see that? Planning boards writing to their legislators?
Yeah, I've absolutely seen planning board chairs write letters that, when they are authorized by their board to do so, on legislation. And go up and testify as well. Yes, it isn't uncommon.
I don't know if the horse is out of the barn, so to speak, on this particular bill, in terms of where it is in the floor, if it's on the floor yet, or.
Well, so it did pass the House,
passed the
a-
House.
and our delegation was split on it. Representative Yokella voted yes, and Representative Tur, I believe, voted no. But I don't know what the prospects are in the Senate. I would be curious to hear what Senator Gannon thinks. I don't know what his position on it is. But what I will say, generally speaking, is that the Senate is where a lot of very ambitious House bills go to die. So it wouldn't shock. So it wouldn't shock me if maybe the Senate, even if they don't ITL it, maybe they'll just table it or send it to interim study, which is another option that
So,
they have.
you know, you got some background on this, so your opinion would be, it might be wise for the town, the planning board to vote to send a letter to Senator Gannon, voicing our displeasure with the bill as it's constituted.
I think it's worthwhile, and I do think that, and I have a personal relationship with Senator Gannon's legislative aide, so I'd be happy to help facilitate that correspondence. She's terrific and is very good about getting information to the senator.
You making a motion, Bruce?
I'll second yours.
Could we do that?
What
Any
is,
more discussion? Yeah, so
what is the motion for?
we're voting on authorizing the planning board chair to send a letter to our state senator expressing our opposition. I don't know how we can talk about that.
Concern with a mandate that is
Concern
not
with a
take
mandate that,
our different specific things
yeah,
into
I mean,
consideration.
there were a couple, one is just the general principle of saying your zoning doesn't matter, we're just gonna make you do what? And we're gonna make all of you do it. Another is, you know, hey, state, you just gave us X number of dollars to study this, like, give us a chance to, you know, come up with some ideas and do something. And, you know, I think you're gonna have uneven impacts. And, there's one other thing. Oh, evidence, like, what's the evidence that this is even gonna work? You already mandated one, has anybody even done a study on how many ADUs were built after the last law was passed? Has that affected, I mean, we don't have affordable housing.
I think it's a shotgun approach that they're taking.
I think that, yeah, they wanna be able to say, we did something, we're doing something.
One thing we would have to flesh out though before we vote is, do we want, if we're gonna make a specific recommendation to Senator Gannon, do we want the bill to be ITL'd? Are we open to some kind of amendment to the bill? And if there is an amendment, then the bill would go to a committee conference, and a lot of bills die that way too.
So
as they
ITL
just
is
get
just
those-
An expedient to legislate.
ITL would kill, it's inexpedient to legislate, would kill the bill. The Senate does have the option of sending it to interim study, which is kind of, it would kill the bill, but there would be, some interim studies do lead to further legislation, they often don't. It's kind of, senators like it because it's a way of killing a bill while kind of still being able to say to voters, well, we're still kind of open to it, so it's kind of death with dignity, so to speak.
Well, you've got some great experience, you know, working through the system. You might send any ideas to Kristen. Kristen, as chair, would probably write the letter, but are the two of you can do something together? But
Can we do either or? Should be very specific as to where it goes.
Well, I mean, it's really up to the board. I mean, I think at this point, my personal view would be that it would be good to leave, if we could, leave us some flexibility to have a dialogue with the senator, because I don't really know what his position is, and I don't know if, and I also don't know how much influence he has on this particular issue, so I think that there are just kind of some aspects that we may need to either hammer out before the vote or leave the motion somewhat ambiguous so that we would have the flexibility to explore those things.
would you be able to, you know, through his administrative aid, come up with an idea of where he?
Definitely, yeah.
And would it be too late if we waited on next meeting to write the letter?
I would have to look to see if the bill has been scheduled for a public hearing. Do you know, Glenn, if it's been scheduled for a hearing?
I thought that it has been.
Okay. Yeah, so the time may be limited, so that's the problem.
How can we best, Kristen, work within that limited time frame? Is that
Every day.
a day?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's legitimate to say this needs more study. I know they did
Yeah.
a study, but how deep did they get into this and take into account what towns are doing right now in terms of looking at our ordinances?
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
So the hearing is on the 7th.
Oh, so
I thought it was said, that's really,
And
that's
who's-
next Wednesday.
And who's the chair of that committee?
It's commerce. Hold on, I'm clicking.
I think it might
Clicking.
be-
Clicking.
I think it might be Gary.
I think Gannon's on judiciary, unless he could be on the second
I
committee.
might be
a lot
thinking of
senators
the
are.
transportation. thing.
Nope. Gannon.
Oh, it is Gannon.
He's chairman.
Oh, okay. In that case, he's very influential. So,
So is that something we could expedite, or?
So,
Now that we know he's the chair, I think that our influence is actually very high potentially.
so are folks in agreement of writing something that's somewhat neutral, like makes those points?
Yep.
This is one size fits all. Please consider that towns are working on this right now.
Yep.
Please don't take away our very carefully thought out zoning ordinances
That are specific to our.
that are
town.
specific to our town and our environment.
In about
And-
1 year, when you come up for reelection,
And,
Let's don't get heavy-handed.
well, you have to use your influence.
Should we do a vote
that
as a board?
that kind of thing I think
To show,
individuals are welcome to do, but we probably shouldn't. Yes.
So I'm just trying to make it easier for you too, where you're not going to be available after, what, 24 hours from now?
A little bit more, but yeah.
Okay.
That's why I'm trying to get the points out, and we can try to get a letter drafted, but might leave it in your hands to follow through.
Yeah, and I'm happy to do that because she and I were talking recently about another issue, so we've already been in communication.
Just as one vote, I'd be very personally much in agreement and supportive of you writing that.
Any objections,
what,
discussion?
should we put the, should we do a vote to find out who's in favor, who's not, and put that in the letter as well?
On the board?
Or a majority vote?
Hmm?
A majority vote
A
or?
majority vote,
Or-
yeah, or unanimous
Who's
vote
in,
is
who's
what I
in
want.
favor of this idea,
Yes,
this bill? We can do that.
I just think if we said unanimously,
Yeah.
Correct. Good point.
We don't know if it's unanimous.
well, I know.
Right, we
We're
haven't
gonna,
actually
we can
voted.
do that right now.
Okay, let's
So,
vote.
show of hands.
Who's in,
Brian,
Who-
I'm not voting,
Aye.
just right, I'm out, Brian's in,
Oh, sorry.
right, so yeah.
Wait, I don't know what you guys are voting for again.
That was my question.
So there was a motion and a second, and then there was a, during the discussion part, we made a clarification about what we were voting on. And it was basically to,
Right, but
Right.
what, I think this is part of the content of the letter. So, yeah, let's finish the letter.
But before you do that,
Yeah.
as kind as it is that Ned just said, he's here, when the,
He's still
when the
talking.
sitting member is here, you are the one who is here.
It-
And the board should really, as harsh as it sounds, decommission.
And we have to actively do
But I
that.
was late, so
Actively.
Brian was
But
filling in.
that doesn't,
Yeah.
you filled in while you weren't here,
Right.
but when you're here, you are the elected planning board member.
Do you wanna make a motion?
As long as you're hearing for the substance of.
we can't keep
exactly.
Brian.
I'm sure we're voting the same way, so.
So I made the
Alright.
motion to ask Brian to step forward and be a voting member tonight, so I'll make the motion to
Decommission.
decommission him, for lack of a better.
I don't wanna hurt your feelings, but I second that.
I'm decommissioned, right?
You are.
Okay.
All right,
Well,
Uh,
if they vote.
all in
One-
favor?
one vote.
Aye.
Aye, so that's back in.
You're back
Okay.
on, sorry, buddy.
So,
I tried.
let's do this. Let's vote first on submitting a letter, and if ever, if that passes, then we'll do a show of hands about
The con-
how we feel about the bill, and that could be part of the content
Yeah.
of the letter. Okay. Any more discussion about whether or not to send a letter to our senator? Okay. All in favor of sending a letter to our senator? All right. And then, this is for a sentence in the letter, perhaps, to say how the board feels. Anybody who supports this bill, raise your hand,
as currently written.
as currently written.
I'd like to decommission.
You almost did.
And if you oppose or would like to see something different, this bill changed in some way, raise your hand.
Oh, could I make a motion that's slightly more specific?
Yeah.
I make a motion that we add language that we have concerns related to the current wording.
Unanimously.
That were what were those three, right, you said kind of 3 points.
Yeah,
like-
I'm hoping Jillian's getting it out now.
Billy, I got it.
Yes.
Yes. So I would feel more comfortable with, here are our concerns, than we oppose this, personally.
I'll second that.
But can we say we're all in agreement,
Unanimous.
if we are.
Well, yeah, we have to vote on that,
Okay.
I think, right?
I think you just did.
I think we just did.
No,
Oh, okay, the amended motion, okay.
I don't.
So when.
I don't know anymore, honestly.
So, when after we had the first and second, we were talking about what would go in the letter, that was my understanding, is that we would say, here are our concerns,
That was my understanding.
and, and we would like.
So did we vote that that is the wording we want to see?
I believe so.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Probably twice, but that's.
So we
fine.
won't,
knows?
we won't say we oppose, or we won't use strong language, and we'll have some supporting reasons.
like it.
All right. But no one raised their hands that they support the bill. So, okay. All right, I will work with Doug on that.
Yeah, so,
quickly.
so just logistically, the main points you wanna hit, I just get like a concise, sort of bullet points so that I can incorporate that into
Yeah.
the letter.
I might actually have some notes
Okay,
in an email that are very similar to what we just talked about.
okay.
The one size fits all, let us finish our study, don't take away our thoughtfully crafted, environmentally sensitive zoning. And, yeah. I think that one other thing.
Okay, and I should be able to get this turned around pretty quickly.
Okay,
If I sent you a draft by tomorrow afternoon, would that work?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just barely, she didn't say,
barely.
but she felt it.
What time would be
No, that's fine, tomorrow afternoon is fine, because I got a full day of work too, so.
okay?
Let's see. Back to our agenda.
Yes, you do have stuff you have to accomplish.
We do. We've accomplished a lot this evening.
That was excellent, Gwen, that was excellent, thank you.
All right, yeah, we didn't clap for Glenn, I'm sorry.
Nice job, Glenn.
All right,
Can I ask one question?
Yes.
Glenn provide a copy of his PowerPoint so I can share it with the entire Conservation Commission?
Email it to Becky, yes.
Thank you.
we can have a little education section of our website.
Guess we have a project for Tuesday. Do you just want me to put it in
Can
documents?
you keep your title line for future communications as well?
Yes,
All right,
I'm working hard on that.
we
Doing well.
have,
You got a good mentor next to you.
Yes, I did.
we have Three Ponds Road Acceptance.
I apologize in advance, but I have questions.
Yes.
Well, you can have questions.
So is Mr. Robinson. So this is my first road acceptance from this table. We just take the roads that they've built. They've been built to the standards that we've set, but there is no impact fee for how much it's gonna cost us to take care of these new roads. Is that accurate?
That's absolutely accurate.
But I think evidence has proven that the roads that are built according to these standards stand up for a period of 25 years.
Right, but when we have to keep buying new plow trucks because there's more and more and more
That would be an
roads.
impact fee.
That's why I just said there's no impact fee.
No, it's never been a part of our impact fee structure.
So if we wanted to have an impact fee that was not necessarily for general residences or commercial buildings, but specifically for when the town takes over a road, by like
Well, it'd be
feet or
part of the
something.
development approval.
Right, I'm saying, because obviously we can't do anything about it now, what process would we go through to do that?
Well,
We would amend our methodology for impact fees.
Okay.
but the methodology would have to prove.
We did have a discussion about this before too, and just the idea that everybody, you pay taxes on the property and we all have a road in front of our house and
Yep, so, sure, but we pay impact fees for other departments, but somehow not roads, when literally I can point to new roads that have come in because of the developments, which mean that we now need to have 5 plow trucks instead of 2. That's a I can point at the impact of having.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be worth investigating. Of course, it would only apply to developments that were proposed after, subsequent to the.
Absolutely, which is why I'm asking what we need to do to investigate whether or not that would make sense.
It would be engaging a consultant to prepare that for us. And I would love to tell you that we would use the one we've used for
I
the
know,
last
he
25
retired.
years,
I
but
know, I was here.
He retired.
I know.
So we
This would
could,
be a good way to test out a new one.
yeah, are you asking, can we put this on the agenda for some point in the coming weeks
Because it's
to
an expense
work?
that isn't in our present budget.
I understand. But,
But you're never gonna get there unless you start, so for
Right.
2025.
These are real fees, you know, like you said, I mean, there's
right,
no
and I know
question
that like,
there.
the river run development, because they're so close to the water, there's some restrictions about how the roads are cared for that this board put in place without any idea of how that's gonna be paid for.
Yeah, I think we had the discussion then too, that it's, each one of those houses is gonna be paying X number of dollars.
But are they gonna
for
be
road
paying
maintenance.
more to have this special, you're close to the
Well,
river?
Here's the thing, the
Well,
Conservation Commission.
They're using less salt, or they should be using.
So we're gonna have a separate truck that has a
No,
different
I
sand
think-
salt
I
Just
think-
wants to see
mixture?
it
Yeah,
that everywhere in town.
Yes,
Oh,
yes,
okay.
and it should be. I mean, you can't say that there's any reason, to me, that requirement was put on the developer solely by someone who wanted to see the development killed or disapproved. Every time you go across the bridge in the town of Brentwood, these trucks, these highway trucks, are spinning that salt spreader, and it's going directly into the river. Now, over in that development, Mill Run development, that's all enclosed, not enclosed drainage, but that's all stormwater drainage systems put in, so the salt water does not run right into the river, as it does when Wayne goes down Mill Road, and he spins salt right into the river. So it should be one standard for the town overall, for every road in town. And I know the Conservation Commission is open to working on that green snow model, and I think it's something we can, you guys got a lot going on at the moment, but hopefully before next town meeting, we will have an ordinance proposed town-wide that would apply to everybody fairly.
So if there are guidelines that you as the planning board think would be better for the town, you don't have to wait till town meeting to do that. You can just go to the select board and say, hey, this is the mix of salt
This is a
we
better,
think
this
you
is
should
a
be
better
using."
way to
Yeah.
salt
Yeah,
the
I think the
roads.
select could adopt the UNH stormwater people who have that green snow model.
As our representative, can you
you'd like
take a?
me to do?
Yes,
Okay.
please. Yeah, we did it, we had a long discussion about it.
It should apply to
You
you.
walked right into that.
Yeah.
That came full
That's
circle.
one of those,
You know
that's a
what?
great idea, Letty.
I was here that other time, so it's
I-
fine.
I have
some research on that
Fantastic.
share with you.
Fantastic.
So for
Shouldn't there
the,
be
for the,
shouldn't there be like something different if he was putting in 25 units? You know, like opposed to 70 units? Like, I would think there should be a different, impact fee when we cram in 70
So,
units.
well, is it,
So what I'll say about your point about taxes is that yes, your taxes pay for a driver to drive a truck, but it doesn't pay for the new truck. It's like every time you need a new truck above the number of trucks we have, it's another fee, another like one-time not
so
replacement.
can we put the, I know we don't have money in the budget right now necessarily to hire somebody to do an analysis, but can we put the CIP on a agenda in the next couple months to talk, because there were other things that, this has come up before too, so maybe we can just have a work session or discussion about ideas to change that, and then we would have to
Find a
figure out when we
consultant.
when we can implement it.
We gotta at least get the quote, so that by come budget
Yeah,
season.
we should at least figure out if there's someone who could do it for us.
Yeah.
Because you're gonna need to do it again in the next 4 or 5 years anyway,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, yeah.
But budget season's coming along pretty quickly, so.
Yes, it
something
is.
a couple of months.
Liz, did you?
Yeah, sorry, I had a question about this because when I went around looking at the different facilities in town, whose place is it to make it so that highway gets some impact fees? It seems like it was an oversight.
Ours, or
Is
this
it planning
board's.
board or is it select
It's
board?
the planning board.
It's the planning.
Well, the zone, it's actually a zoning ordinance. So it got adopted by the townspeople of the town of Brentwood.
But it seems like I was just.
The methodology.
But the planning board is the one that
required.
adopts,
The-
the planning board is the one that adopts the impact fee schedule.
Yes, because that's the way we wrote it in the ordinance.
Is Highway the only one that got overlooked?
Yes.
Actually, no, it's not, it is not a common impact fee, feature, yeah, it just, I know that there are some towns that have done it. When you said it, I was trying to think if I remembered how the court cases ended up with it. I don't believe that it ended up failing in any instance, so I do believe we can do it. It
Yeah.
isn't common.
Right.
But that doesn't matter.
I don't know, it just seems like it
It
would
can
be,
be uncommon.
it would be easier to calculate that than the fraction of a desk of a student or like half a police officer's vest or whatever, right? Like those other impact fees that are so incremental, this feels more concrete.
Well, and also you have people who don't have any kids, you know, paying for schools, which I understand that makes sense to me.
They actually don't
But,
pay
well,
this,
whatever, you know
no,
what
they
I'm
don't pay
saying?
the school impact fees. They're the
But they still
55.
pay
Over
taxes.
fifty-five though, but the none over fifty-five people do, and some of them don't.
But they still pay taxes
But they
every
still
year.
pay tax, everyone pays taxes.
No, I know, but I'm just saying for the impact.
For the
fees,
impact
don't they
fees.
also pay impact fees?
No, if you,
Not over fifty-five, we're not talking about some special community.
if you build a new house in Brentwood, yes, you pay the impact fees.
And they go to things like library and school and stuff, maybe.
Yes, there is a
every
schedule for, I mean, I live on a state-owned road, and I've never complained about
Yeah.
how much it
I
costs to
think
plow Brentwood.
You should do your best to try to get impact fees on the highway.
We'll
My comment.
discuss it with the select board.
Okay, and we'll talk about the CIP
Yeah.
as a whole, not CIP,
I don't know.
the other acronym. Maybe when things slow down a little bit. Okay, so back to this though. So we have a recommendation from TEC that it's meets all the requirements.
Correct. Historically, the planning board's never signed off on a final until we've been out and physically walked the road in question. Now, this one doesn't have as many driveway culverts, I guess, as a lot of them do. But a lot of times we go out and we find culverts that have a lot of debris in them. So we just have a final checklist by walking around, and everybody that's there, every member of the board is responsible for making a good judgment. And in past cases, we've found deficiencies that we picked up on that sidewalk. Normally, we invite the town engineer along with the board on a Saturday morning, or it could be any time afternoons. Now the weather's good, the place is longer. But that's just been we don't have to follow that procedure, but that was always seemingly a good process. To have you guys put your boots on the ground and walk along and look for different generally drainage issues. But not that you have to do that.
It's probably good for people who haven't been out there in a while too, to see, what it looks like now.
Wayne has a couple of questions regarding this too.
Okay, so do we wanna do a site walk, site visit?
Yeah,
Yes.
This is more than just a lawn reduction. This is a request to suggest to the selectmen are the ultimate deciders, but they've always left in the hands of the planning board to review requests of that nature and then give them a recommendation via letter, which we've always done. So yes, I think it would be a great idea to continue that process. Yep.
And it's just this section, it's not
Yes.
the,
Mhm.
yeah.
Again, no, wouldn't have to be the engineer, but it might not be a bad idea to ask the engineer to be present while the board was walking.
I think you'd want to I think you'd want Wayne there.
Well, he could come as well, but the engineer's responsible for the actual specifications.
Well, he signed off on
He
it.
signed off on it.
Right. So, calendar-wise, we don't have, this is March, so there's no like hard and fast deadline on this.
I'm sure that Joe wants it as soon as possible.
Okay, are you guys up for a site walk? Sometime in the next few weeks?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we're gonna make it, it works for me.
June 8th?
I'm sorry, what?
June 8th?
Perfect.
That'd be a
That
Saturday.
means that you wouldn't be able to get in front of the select board until June 18th.
That's fine, I mean, all we're gonna do, his major costs are winter maintenance, and so there really is no cost to the developer.
No, he wants it yesterday, so,
Yeah, really, you may want a lot of things.
literally.
Do you,
Where did this?
Right.
Wayne to go to that?
yeah,
Okay, I don't think he can hear anything we're saying.
okay.
How about now? Can you hear me now? We're talking about a site visit on June 8th for this road that we're talking about.
Yep, I'll be available.
Okay,
What time?
Which road are you talking about? I'm all confused. This,
3 Ponds.
oh, another three.
9?
9 a.m. June 8th. Is there anything else you want to talk to us about this?
The turnaround.
The only thing I'm in here after is when we get this road, if you guys accept this road, first of all, the sidewalks down there, they have to be plowed.
By the town?
I don't know, that's what I'm.
Oh.
that's what I'm
Sidewalks
trying
are
to find out.
typically
Because,
the
we don't have a
property
machine
owner, right?
That's
Yeah.
gonna plow.
I don't think you're responsible.
It's either the property owner or it's part of the
I don't know.
It's part of the
HOA.
condo fee, I
They
think,
have the
like-
sidewalks there now, okay? And they have been plowing. They have been being plowed.
But they also have their lawns mowed too, I would think that'd be part of it.
Yeah, I don't think
HOA.
that isn't a responsibility of the town.
I believe in River Run, I could be wrong, but I believe we asked for that to be part of
The HOA.
the HOA documents. Did you-
Specifically called it out.
Yes, did you guys do that, the same for 3 Ponds?
I honestly can't remember. but-
Either way, I don't
but
think it
there's-
would be our
There isn't even a
responsibility.
responsibility for a municipality to do that.
Yeah.
Lots of municipalities don't plow their sidewalks in the wintertime.
But when you plow, you're gonna plow the snow right on the sidewalk.
Yeah,
Yeah?
Just like
happens
doing
all
my
the,
lawn.
happens all the time in winter and
Well,
in all sorts of towns. I mean, some towns do.
All right, what,
Exeter plows their sidewalks. Rochester doesn't.
yeah.
but Exeter, if you go downtown after snowstorm, there's no place to park because your car is sitting about 6 feet away from the sidewalk.
We're gonna treat them like, we're gonna treat them. the way
Okay,
we say like all of us.
we're not responsible for sidewalks. What else?
Okay. And the other thing I know they got water from the county.
Right.
Who takes care of the water? When that water breaks in the wintertime, who takes care of that?
That's all part of their agreement with
Yeah,
the county.
it is, yeah.
That's all with the county?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
All right.
All right.
All right.
So June 8th, 9 o'clock.
June 8th, 9 o'clock. Okay.
Perfect. Feeling right.
Yes, and I will remind.
And maybe, yeah, we'll meet at the community center, but I think it's, oh no, it's right here. We'll meet at the clubhouse.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay. Sign manifests. We don't have a manifest, correct? Anything else before we talk about non-public? Yeah, anything else before that?
Hmm?
Okay.
Oh, I just had one thing.
Yes?
The podium.
Oh, yes?
Look at his face. He's like,
I was thinking about that when I was on vacation, or on another vacation, but I will make contact when we talked about toward the end of the first quarter, which is kind of over.
yeah.
Squeaky wheels. I was gonna ask, I think that the select board probably sent him that, retainer check.
I have no idea. That was before my time. I can find out if that would be helpful.
Maybe Jillian
Not that.
Aaron, that is encumbered in the 2023 budget year. I think they might have sent it. If you could let me know, I'll be able to leverage.
Okay.
I know where it was.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's it.
Anything else
Mm-mm.
before somebody makes a motion?
Are you gonna want like an actual, you're gonna want an
Yeah.
actual number, hold on.
Do we need
Just talk amongst yourselves.
litigation? Oh, is anybody else not able to make it to the next meeting?
Next
out.
meeting,
Ned's
I
out.
told you I would, yeah.
I'm out.
the 18th?
The 16th.
16.
Yeah.
I just wanna make sure we have a quorum.
I'm good.
You good? Staff?
Staff, you're good?
Yeah.
I think I'll be here,
Yep.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll be here.
Thank you.
Quorum.
I make a motion that we go into non-public under 91-A colon, hold on. To, B,
Non-public.
that's legal matters.
Second.
Can I?
Good night. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
There is a court case about towns having to plow sidewalks, like, just check on that, yeah.
Okay.
They just looked it up, it's like, it says if you take the roads, you got the sidewalks.
We'll have
It's an
the
80,
HOA.
Doug, it's an 88 thing, you could probably run it to the disability institute.
All right, all in favor of going
Do
into?
we have to do
Aye.
roll call?
We do have to do it.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Voting on going into non-public session, Bruce?
Aye.
I think I need to go home. I guess, yeah, aye.
Ready? Aye. Okay, so,
Turn my.
yeah, I think